Kolena Aguiji.
It's good to be here, John.
I've heard that a dark cloud has fallen on the white path you were walking. It is good that you have turned your thoughts to the Cherokee. It was caused by Yahuwah. We are in trouble, Raven. And Yahuwah has sent you to give us counsel. My house is yours. My people are yours. Come, rest with us.
And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters. And so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, and go forth into a further country, where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood, till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely, of a year and a half. And the same region is called Arsareth, 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 Arsareth.
America, America.
Arsareth. Then dwelt they there until the latter time.
Ever since European colonists began settling in the land that would later become the United States of America, many artifacts have been discovered which suggest that one of the ancient Native American mound builder civilizations, which the U.S. calls Hopewell, are descendants of Hebrew people who migrated to ancient North America during the 500s BC, which is approximately the earliest estimated dates of the Hopewell mound builders in Florida, Tennessee, and Iowa. Yet there have been many people in the United States who insist that every single one of these artifacts are fake. My personal opinion is because it opposes the idea that nobody sailed to America before Christopher Columbus. But there's at least one extremely large piece of evidence carved right into the landscape near Fayetteville, Ohio, that can't be denied as solid evidence of Hebrew people in ancient North America. The Hopewell mound builders built hundreds of thousands of structures out of various types of earth materials. These structures included burial mounds, animal effigy mounds, forts, temples, and advanced geometric structures with lunar and solar alignments. Many of these structures have been leveled down and destroyed as the United States expanded west and built itself right over them, but some still exist today. Early U.S. settlers would create detailed survey drawings of some of these structures. There are a few good books which were published by the Smithsonian in the mid-1800s that show detailed survey drawings from the Ohio and New York areas. They're called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, Aboriginal Monuments of New York, and Antiquities of New York. But there was a one-of-a-kind mound builder structure that was unlike all the rest, at least as far as I know. In 1823, Major Isaac Roberdeau of the United States Army Corps of Engineers created this survey drawing of a massive earth structure just southwest of present-day Fayetteville, Ohio. Notice the Hebrew oil lamp. Notice the 9-candle menorah. Another drawing of this structure is included in one of the Smithsonian books I mentioned earlier, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And still, there are some who insist that this survey drawing was fake and that the structure never even existed. Unfortunately, the United States Army Corps of Engineers completely destroyed this structure in the early 1900s and leveled it into flat ground. But why? Was it an intentional attempt to erase this odd Hebrew structure from American history? Or was it simply out of carelessness and lack of respect for ancient American antiquities? I don't know. But here's the good news. They missed a spot. And you can see it right on Google Earth. Here's a satellite image of the area where the structure was said to have been located. It's just southwest of Fayetteville, Ohio, where the 131 and the 50 intersect, and it's all just farmlands and trees. Do you see the spot they missed? There it is, right there. The Hebrew letter Shin, or Sin. And it's okay if you didn't see it. I didn't see it either until someone pointed it out to me a few months ago. Now some of you may be saying, wait, but that's not on the survey drawing. And you're right. So I wonder if that's why they missed it. In 1823, that whole area was probably covered with thick forest, and who knows for how long after that. Perhaps still in the early 1900s when they leveled it down. So what we're looking at here are massive ditches that include the Hebrew letter Shin, or Sin. I'll leave it to you to research the significance of this letter, but it's a very sacred letter in the Hebrew alphabet. I snapped this screenshot on Google Earth in the fall of 2015, and yes, I didn't even notice the letter in over the year's time that I had it. But as you can see, the letter shows up very nicely because the crop fields surrounding it have been harvested. The reason why the letter and the other lines are still green is because of the plant growth down in the massive ditches. But even if you look at it on Google Earth at a time when the fields are green with crops, you can still see the letter. So go check it out. And if you're ever out that way, hey, maybe the landowner will even let you walk around it. It's worth a try, right? I wish I would have known about that letter when I was out there. I would have asked too. So why the ditches? Well, when the mound builders built their structures, they had to get the earth materials from somewhere, right? So they dug ditches. When you look at the survey drawings of other mound builder structures, oftentimes you'll see that they dug ditches and built the walls of earth right alongside the ditches. Now, I can't tell from the 1823 survey if there were ditches alongside its walls or not, but if there weren't any, then it's likely that the dirt came from those ditches that include the Hebrew letter. But either way, that letter is there, and it's huge.
Virtually none of Thanksgiving has an ounce of accuracy, notes the bestseller Lies My Teacher Told Me. The idea of Europe bringing civilization to the Americas simply flips truth on its head. This is what European explorers actually found in North America.
Far and away the most beautiful city on earth. 5 times the size of London or Rome. Great towers and buildings rising from the water. 60,000 gleaming houses, and how spacious and how well built they were. Of beautiful stonework and cedar wood, and the wood of other sweet scented trees. The many streets and boulevards of the city were so neat and well swept, despite the multitude of inhabitants. Crisscrossed with a complex network of canals, like an enormous Venice, but also remarkable floating gardens that reminded of nowhere else on Earth.
While Europe was drinking water from its polluted city rivers, huge aqueducts transported America's water from fresh springs.
But what impressed most were the special merchant areas, where timber and tiles and other building materials were bought and sold, as well as greengrocer streets, where one could buy every sort of vegetable, fruits, honeys, nut paste and chocolates. Astonished by the personal cleanliness and hygiene of the colourfully dressed populace, and by their extravagant use of soaps, deodorants, and breath sweeteners.
Most Europeans never bathed and kept clothes on at all times. The Pilgrim's Notes biographer Zini Feiner had a terrible smell. Indians tried, quote, without success to teach them to bathe. The settlers also had bad breath from rotting teeth. Death and starvation was so common that corpses were just dumped in open pits known as poreholes, Many turned to alcohol and committed suicide. In fact, the story of the first settlers has been deliberately changed, notes author James Lowen, because the truth is so shameful. They actually settled hundreds of miles further south and stayed in America because the mission was a failure. Their real aim, reports historian Robert Beverly, was to find some gold and take it back to Europe.
They spent their days digging random holes in the ground, haplessly looking for gold instead of planting crops. Soon they were starving and digging up putrid Indian corpses to eat. They took some Indian prisoners and forced them to teach the colonists how to farm.
And the meal with the natives wasn't quite the Thanksgiving shown on TV and in schoolbooks.
The colonists offered the Indians a toast to eternal friendship, whereupon the chief, his family, advisors, and 200 followers dropped dead of poison.
He knows when Heinrich Himmler called the final solution, quote, delousing, Himmler was only echoing the Pilgrim Army's rallying cry, nits make lice, nits being Indian babies. This was a map of Indian nations across the US. 80% of the first government's entire budget went on attacking existing Indian settlements to take their developed farmland. Settlers would most probably not have survived, writes Jennings, on their own. 95% of America's entire population was then wiped out. American Holocaust notes there is documented evidence of colonist leaders going town after town, deliberately killing all men, women and children. Yet school texts and history books remain silent. Orders came from the very top. Under the direct order of George Washington, at least 28 of 30 Seneca towns and all the towns of the Mohawk, Onondaga and Cayuga were simply obliterated. George Washington wrote, the Indian country, quote, must be destroyed. Thomas Jefferson called to, quote, pursue Indians to extermination. Nobel Peace Prize winner Theodore Roosevelt called beneficial the eradication of the native race. Stannard notes genocide was official public policy. California Governor Peter Burnett in his 1851 message to the legislature.
Extermination must continue to be waged until the Indian becomes extinct.
Another governor issued the public proclamation to, quote, pursue, kill and destroy all Indians. A witness notes the ensuing bloodbaths practically wiped out the native race.
The whites shoot them down like wolves, men, women and children, wherever they could find them. This war of extermination against the Aborigines is tending to the final extinction of the race.
What reportedly saved the race from extinction was their use as slave labor.
This extermination policy has proved so injurious to the interests of the whites. Indian labor is indispensable.
Highly prized slaves were Indian girls as young as 3, said the Marysville Appeal, for fulfilling double roles of labor and of lust.
The Pilgrims had hardly explored the shores 4 days before they robbed the graves of my ancestors and stole their corn, wheat, and beans. The Indians knew this fact, yet welcomed and befriended the settlers.
I've heard that a dark cloud has fallen on the white path you were walking. It is good that you have turned your thoughts to the Cherokee. It was caused by Yahuwah.
It says here, in order to provide a truthful and reliable account of the origins of these Indian nations, an origin so doubtful and obscure, we would need some divine revelation or assistance to reveal this origin to us and help us understand it. However, lacking that revelation, we can only speculate and conjecture about these beginnings, basing ourselves on the evidence provided by these people whose strange ways, conduct, and lowly actions are so like those of the Hebrews. Like who? Like the Hebrews. Thus we can almost positively affirm that they are Jews and Hebrews, and I would not commit a great error if I were to state this as fact, considering their way of life, their ceremonies, their rites and superstitions, their omens and hypocrisies, so akin to and characteristic of those of the Jews. In no way do they seem to differ. The Holy Scriptures bear witness to this, and from them we draw proofs and reasons for holding this opinion to be true. It says here, in South America, the hypothesis connecting the American Indians to the 10 lost tribes of Israel was advanced mainly by Spanish missionaries and travelers while coming across impressive archaeological remains of the pre-Columbian civilizations or investigating the way of life of local tribes believed to recognize various customs and beliefs that they related to the Bible and Judaism. Most reports refer to native tribes living in regions that today are part of Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru, but also in the countries of Central America, especially Mexico. Among the prominent expositors of those theories, a mention should be made of Father Diego Duran, 1588, author of The Aztecs, A History of the Indies of the New Spain, Father Gregorio Garcia, and his Origin de los Indios de los Nuevo Mundo, 1729. Alright, here we are at the Jewish Virtual Library, and this is regarding Montesinos, well, Antonio de Montesinos, right? So we're going to learn who he was and what he said about his encounter here in the Americas, okay? Jewish Library, Project Aves, okay? It says here, Montesinos Antonio, Marrano traveler on a trip to South America during 1641-42. Montesinos discovered a group of natives in Ecuador who could recite the Shema and were acquainted with other Jewish rituals. He brought this news to Amsterdam in 1644, and the congregational authorities, Manasseh ben Israel, among them, had him repeat his account under oath. So Manasseh ben Israel, you can see who that is, very important Jewish scholar. That the assumption was that these natives were a remnant of the 10 lost tribes, of the tribes of Reuben and Levi, according to Montesinos. He then left for Brazil, where he died. Reasserting on his deathbed to the truth of his report, Manasseh ben Israel dwells on Montesinos' discovery in a booklet entitled Esperanza de Israel. It says here, the Indians of the Yucatan and the Acusanitenses do circumcise themselves. The Teutonians of New Spain and Mexicans, as Roman and Gomasa and General History of the Indians testify, rend their garments if there were happen any sudden misfortune or death of any. Gregorius Gracious in Monarchia in Gasonum and Isle of Peru says that the Guanacapus, hearing that his Sone Atahualpa fled for fear of the army of his enemy, he rent his garments. The Mexicans and Teutonians or the Totocanenses kept continually fire upon their altars, as God commanded in Leviticus. The inhabitants of Hispaniola think those do sin who lie with a woman lie after her childbirth, and the Indians of New Spain do severely punish sodomy. Many of the Indians do bury the dead on the mountains, which also is a Jewish custom, and Garcia said that the name Shanaan is found in those countries. You may wonder at this, that the Indians do every 50 years celebrate Jubilee with great pomp in Mexico and metropolis of the whole province. Also, that on the Sabbath day all are bound to be present in the temple to perform their sacrifices and ceremonies. They also were discovered from their wives. They also were divorced from their wives if they were not honest. The Indians of Peru, New Spain, and Guatemala did marry the widows of their dead brethren. May not you judge from these things that the Jews lived in those places, and that the Gentiles learned such things of them? Added also to what has been said that the knowledge which the Indians had of the creation of the world and of the universal flood they borrowed from the Israelites. So this is the book Manasseh ben Israel and His World. Alright? It says the rise and fall of the Jewish Indian theory. Okay, so it says here, whenever I tell students in America that there was a serious theory years ago that the Indians were Jews and that some of the lost tribes were located in America, they looked blankly at me, and if it's my nonsense, or they laughed embarrassedly to be in a room where such things are said. However, I quickly tried to calm their fears by pointing out that after Columbus met the Indians in 1492, there was a problem accounting for who they were and where they came from. Okay, again, nobody knew who they were, where they came from, right? If everyone on the surface of the earth was a descendant of Adam and Eve, and the 7 survivors of the flood, then the Indians had to be connected to the biblical world. Columbus himself had no problem. He thought they were Asians, since he was sure that he had reached Cathay. That's what the story is, right? It says explorers and missionaries offered theories tracing the Indians back to migrations from the Middle East, from Phoenicia, Arabia, or maybe from Solomon's Ophir. To deny a biblical origin for the Indians was to see them and their history as outside of the scripture, and scripture as incomplete and inadequate. To deny a biblical origin for the Indians was to see them and their history as outside of scripture, and scripture as incomplete and inadequate. Only a few hardy souls in the 16th century dared suggest this. Pay attention to this part. The missionaries began to suspect something radically different was going on in the environs of Boston, namely that pure English Christians were baptizing and converting Indians who were Jews. Wow. Alright? So it says last month's column sketched the basis for the belief that American Indian is descended from the 10 lost tribes. One of the foremost proponents of this theory was the Indian trader James Adair, 1709-1783. In 1775, he wrote The History of the Indians, arguably the most significant 19th century work on the southeastern Indians, in which he presented 23 arguments that prove the North American Aborigines were descended from the 10 lost tribes. These are their division in tribes, their worship of Jehovah, their notions of theocracy, their belief in the administration of angels, their language and dialects, their manner of counting time, their prophets and high priests, their festivals, fast and religious rites, their daily sacrifice, their ablutions and anointings, their laws of uncleanliness, their abstinence from unclean things, their marriage, divorces, punishments of adultery, their several punishments, their cities of refuge, their purification and preparatory ceremonies, the ornaments, their manner of curing the sick, their burial of the dead, their mourning for the dead, their raising the seed to descend, their change of the names adapted to the circumstances and times, their own traditions, the account of English writers, and the testimonies given by Spaniards and other writers of the primitive inhabitants of Mexico and Peru. Wasn't going to take it there yet, but there you go, Mexico and Peru. In the Literary Digest, September 21st, 1912, are the Indians of Hebrew origin. William Penn gave the clue to many subsequent biblical scholars in declaring that he had found in the American Indians the lost tribes of Israel. The superficial resemblance between the two peoples was so striking that he was led to say, "When I look at their children, I imagine myself in the Jewish quarter of London." When questioned concerning the legends of his people, he replied, "They are all in the Old Testament. Read them there without the trouble of taking them down from our people." Corroborative of this statement of Dr. W. W. Warren, his History of the Ojibwe Nation, that in response to parts of the Bible, which he translated for his people, they said, "The book must be true, for our ancestors have told us the same stories for generations. The theory here presented is not new. The Jewish Encyclopedia, given the substance of it without pronouncing upon its credibility. The writer meets the objection to the theory based on the great distance between the habitations of the two people by citing the book of Esdras. Still more conclusive proof is found in comparative study of the language, religion, customs, and traditions of the two peoples. Such resemblances as these are noted, like the Hebrews, the Indians, when first visited by the Europeans, were a very religious people, yet they had entirely escaped the idolatry which was common to almost all ancient peoples. They acknowledged but one God, the Great Spirit, and the name by which he was known was Ale, the old Hebrew name for God. In their dances they were heard to say distinctively, Hallelujah, or Praise Jah. They were the very word which was used by the Hebrews themselves. They kept annual festivals which resembled those of the Mosaic ritual. They performed morning and evening sacrifices and offered of their first fruits to God. They practiced the rite of circumcision and celebrated a feast like the tabernacles. They had cities of refuge to which even a murderer might flee and be safe. The Indians reckoned time in the same manner as the Hebrews, and their year began at the same season. The same superstitions seem to have marked their burial places. The same creeds were the rule of their lives, both as to the present and the future. The Indians, as well as the ancient Hebrews, lived in tribes ruled by chiefs, and their forms of government were almost identical. The clan system of the Indians has preserved a clue to some of the mysterious rites of the early Hebrews. What is not known about the clan system of the Iroquois explain what was formerly mystical about the tribes of Israel. Each tribe had a totem, usually some animal such as a deer, a bear, or a panther. So also had Israelites such a totem. Thus unmistakable traces of Jewish prayer echo in the voice of Joseph Riverwind, the Amahura war chief of the Northern Arawak Nation, the indigenous peoples of South America and the Caribbean, as he sings Shema Shema Nayena Popaska Hoya Ya. He translated his ancient Native American song for Breaking Israel News. Listen, listen, people, as you gather together, we will dance before the Creator. This is strongly reminiscent of the Jewish prayer Shema, which literally means hear. And he says, among my people, our ancient name for God is Jah, the Supreme Spirit of Spirits, very similar to Yahweh. Chief Riverwind explained, among my wife's ancestors, the Anikituwaya, the Cherokee, they called God Jehovah. The similarities don't stop there. They carried an ark into battle, celebrate 7 feasts, kept a 7th day of rest, had cities of refuge, and don't eat pork. Though the eerie etymological similarities may be coincidental, archetypal themes also connect the spirituality of Native Americans to the Bible. Chief Riverwind told the Choctaw story about how the Creator came to a man called Nuah and told him the world would be covered with water. The man was told to make a great raft to save mankind. The stories come from oral tradition which date to pre-Columbian times. Says another Native American story tells of a time when the world was all one landmass and we were all one tribe, explained Chief Riverwind. We tried to build a sky tower to the Creator, hence Babel, right? The story of Babel. These are the pre-missionary oral traditions. They are passed down through specially trained storytellers who are forbidden from changing a single word. And he continues saying, some Anishinaabe, Chippewa, believe they are from the tribe of Ephraim. Chief Riverwind explains Anishinaabe is amazing similar to the Hebrew word Anshenabi, people of the prophet. They lived on the coast, but their legends say that before that they came from across the great waters. We have cave drawings of these ships that are very similar to drawings of Phoenician ships in history books. Again, Phoenician connecting with the Hebrew, right? The Paleo-Hebrew, the Phoenicians, the Meshechs, right? The Aztecs.
So not only is this section going to go over some controversial ancient writings found on artifacts, rocks, and caves in North America, but it's also going to go over actual Hebrew and Middle Eastern languages and customs that are still preserved in some Native American tribes even to this day. So for people who insist that there's no evidence of Middle Eastern ancestry in any Native Americans, they just haven't done their research, because again, this video is loaded with examples, which are only the tip of the iceberg of what's available out there to learn. Now, there are people out there, especially in US academia, who love to dismiss the tens of thousands of artifacts showing ancient Middle Eastern languages and customs here in North America as fakes. But then how do they explain some of the Middle Eastern languages and customs, particularly Hebrew, that are still preserved among some Native American cultures? Is it just coincidence? Of course not. And I'm going to show you a few examples. Now, I'm not saying that all Native Americans have Hebrew or other Middle Eastern ancestry, but there definitely are some. Now, if you're a Native American watching this video, it may or may not apply to you, depending on what tribes are in your ancestry. If it does apply to you, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with the name of God. Here are 2 columns. One column shows the name of God in Hebrew and various pronunciations of it. The other column shows various pronunciations of the name of God or Creator, as he is more often called, in various Native American cultures. Look at his name. Coincidence? No. Next, I want to show you a list of Algonquin words and phrases from a book printed in 1825 called View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith. Now, like many books in this time period of the United States, it calls the Native Americans savages, which I don't agree with. Just because the Native American tribes had different cultures than the European settlers doesn't mean they were savages. But anyway, be prepared to see that term in old books like this. So here's a list of words and phrases from View of the Hebrews shown in 3 columns. The first column is in English. The second column is from Algonquin tribes originally from the eastern United States before the government took their lands and forced them onto reservations. The third column is Hebrew or Chaldaic, which are both Semitic languages. Obviously, columns 2 and 3 are spelled out with English letters so that the reader can try to pronounce them as they actually sound. Look how similar these words and phrases are that have been preserved in the Algonquin languages. Some are exact, some are near exact, others are very similar. And look at the type of words and phrases. A lot of them are biblical. This is the real deal. Linguistics like this are not coincidences or fakes. View of the Hebrews is a very informative book, and I suggest you read it. It has many more examples of language, customs, and beliefs preserved among Native Americans that tie into Middle Eastern ancestry. Another excellent book is The 10 Tribes of Israel by Timothy R. Jenkins, printed in 1883. There are many other old books like these. I'm going to give an example of an account from the 10 Tribes of Israel. It's on page 16, and I'll just read it for you here. It says, "The following is from Alexander's Messenger, published many years ago in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." And again, this book was published in 1883, so many years ago from 1883. Anyway, it goes on to say, "A government officer stationed at Lake Superior at an early day, before any white settlers had invaded that part of the country, after becoming acquainted with a number of Indian tribes, found one tribe in possession of a copper tube, tightly soldered. And when asked what it contained, they said they were not able to tell, but they had received it from their ancestors a long time ago. The officer finally prevailed upon them to let him open the article, and when he did so, he found it filled with parchment, with inscriptions that he could not read. But by sending the parchment to Washington City, where it was examined by competent Hebrew scholars, it was declared to be part of the 5 books of Moses." So that's the first 5 books of the Bible. Here we have another link in the chain proving that Hebrews were here many years before the white man came to this continent. Now I want to move on to Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce tribe, who were forced westward off their land by the U.S. Army. Chief Joseph's story can easily be found on the internet and in various books. In 1877, Chief Joseph, which is his English name, was captured by the army. When they searched his medicine bag, they took out a small tablet from him. He, the chief, said that the tablet had been passed down in his family for many generations, and that they had inherited it from their white ancestors, and that white men had come among his ancestors long ago. The tablet was confirmed by Professor Robert Biggs to be an ancient writing called cuneiform. Robert Biggs was a professor of Assyriology at the Oriental University of Chicago. The tablet was simply a sales receipt for a lamb bought around 2040 BC in the Assyrian-Babylonian area of the Middle East. I'll let you read the translation here because I'll butcher the names. Babylon is also the area where the Tower of Babel was built, and the Book of Mormon tells us that the Jaredites came to ancient America sometime after the Tower of Babel. And for anyone who assumes that Chief Joseph was lying about the tablet, take a look at his medicine bag. On his medicine bag is a symbol known as the Star of Asher, which is an ancient symbol for an Assyrian-Babylonian god. As of 1971, in honor of that ancient symbol, the Assyrian flag has the Star of Asher on it today. The 4-point star has 3 streams of light going out from between each point. The main difference in Chief Joseph's star is that each stream of light starts out as one stream and then separates into 3 points at the end. This is not fake. This is not coincidence. This is real. Now I want to talk about the Cherokee tribe. Here is their account of the creation of the world, which you'll find is almost exactly the same as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible. This is in their words. You can just pause the video to read over it. The Cherokee also have a special ceremony in the fall called the Green Corn Ceremony. Take some time to pause the video and look at the similarities of the Green Corn Ceremony in comparison to the special fall ceremonies of Israel. The Muskogee or Creek tribe also have a special fall ceremony called the Green Corn Dance. Now take a look at the similarities between this ceremony and the fall ceremonies of Israel. These 2 examples of ceremonial similarities are only from 2 Native American tribes, but there are many more tribes that you can research who also have similar customs and beliefs to the Hebrews. As I've said so many times throughout this video, these are not coincidences. They've been passed down through many generations from their ancient ancestors. Next, I want to talk about the Cheyenne tribe, but I'm going to save that for last because I learned some things from one of their medicine men, and it's going to take up a big chunk of this section. I thought about making it a separate video, but it's just so interesting that I want to share it here. So right now, let's go over some artifacts. Each of these artifacts deserves their own video, which I'd like to do in the future, but this video is already long enough as it is, so I'll be brief about the artifacts. So I've shared some examples of Middle Eastern languages and customs that have been handed down through the generations in some Native American tribes. It's there. It's in their tribes. It can't be denied. It's not fake. It's not coincidence. It's fact. Yet, over the entire history of the United States, whenever artifacts are found that are tied to Middle Eastern cultures, U.S. academia always finds a way to make up a story about how they're fake, and anybody who was involved in finding them is just a fraud. Why? Well, that's a whole other video, and again, I'm trying to keep this as short and simple as I can, but it has to do a lot with ideas called manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, and a guy you may have heard of by the name of John Wesley Powell. Now, with the tens of thousands of artifacts found in the U.S. over the last few hundred years, of course there's going to be some fakes. But all of them? Not a chance. Especially when there are Native American tribes from the eastern U.S. and Canada who have Middle Eastern languages and customs preserved in their cultures to this day. For every story I've heard from U.S. academia to discredit certain artifacts and the people who found them, there's always been a strong counter-argument in defense of the artifacts. On many artifacts from the eastern U.S. and Canada, you'll see this symbol. This is a word in the cuneiform language, which originated in the Middle East shortly after the time of the Tower of Babel. Yet, it is a sacred symbol in many Algonquin tribes right here in North America that has been passed on through the generations from their ancient ancestors. Why is it sacred to these tribes? Because it is the name of the Creator, which is read from right to left, and the name is Yod-Heh-Vah. Now, like I said, this symbol has been found all over the eastern half of North America and even out west. But I want to focus right now on what are known as the Michigan relics, many of which have this cuneiform name of God carved on them, as well as Egyptian, Assyrian, Phoenician, and Greek characters, and artwork depicting biblical stories. Yet, U.S. academia says that the Michigan relics are all fakes created by some guys named James Scotford, Daniel Soper, and James Savage, starting in 1890 and into the early 1900s. But there are some major problems with these claims. The biggest problem is that even though the Michigan relics were a popular topic from 1890 to the early 1900s, the artifacts were being found as early as the 1840s. Why is this a big problem? Because Daniel Soper wasn't born until 1843. James Savage wasn't born until 1844. And James Scotford wasn't even born until 1852. You see, after Michigan became a state in 1838, people started moving there. And as they began clearing trees and plowing their fields and also digging through the mounds, they would find these artifacts, sometimes even mangled in the roots of very old trees. Signed documents by more than 50 farmers across 27 counties in Michigan show that they found these artifacts on their lands. And by the 1850s and 60s, there were even museums that had some of the artifacts on display. Another big problem is that the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection is estimated to about 3,000 pieces, yet all the Michigan relics total has a low estimate of 10,000 pieces and a high estimate of 30,000 pieces. And most of them were made from copper and black slate from the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is on the separate part of Michigan on the other side of Lake Michigan and above Wisconsin. And ancient copper mines are there, which are estimated to date back as early as the 2000s BC, and in operation clear up until the 500s AD. And the Adena and Hopewell mound builders were experts in copper and other metal work. And like I said, it wasn't until 1890 that the Michigan relics became well known due to the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection. Now let's say, for the benefit of the doubt, that these guys were making fakes. Let's say, since they were living in Michigan, they knew about the artifacts that had been found since the 1840s, and they decided to make some fakes and try to get rich and famous. Their 3,000-piece collection is still 7,000 pieces short of the low estimate of Michigan relics. But because U.S. Academia says the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection are fakes, they also dismiss the other 7,000 to 27,000 Michigan artifacts and the fact that they were being found as early as the 1840s, before Scotford was even born, and before or around the same time that Soper and Savage were born. And again, the cuneiform Yod-Heh-Vah symbol has been passed down through the generations among Algonquin Native Americans from their ancient ancestors. And it is the name of Creator, and they pronounce it Yod-Heh-Vah, even to this day. Another interesting find in Michigan is this carving of a Hebrew menorah in a cave that belongs to the Potawatomi tribe. And the Potawatomi say that this is a sacred symbol from their ancient ancestors. U.S. Academia says it's a pitchfork. But as you probably know, U.S. Academia doesn't care about learning from the Native Americans. Here are some Hebrew carvings found in Connecticut of the names of some biblical prophets. But U.S. Academia says that some guy who just happened to know Hebrew was taking a lunch break from working in the mines and decided to just carve these names into the rock. Here's another artifact called the Bat Creek Stone, found on Cherokee land near Bat Creek in Tennessee in 1889 during an official U.S. archaeological excavation controlled by the Smithsonian itself. They said it was ancient Cherokee writing and would display it or print it as such. And nobody ever accused the stone of being fake until about 75 years later in the 1960s, when Cyrus Gordon, a professor of Mediterranean studies at Brandeis University, said that the stone had been shown upside down for all those years, and that when turned right side up, the characters engraved on the stone were ancient Hebrew letters that said, "For the Judeans." Some other translations vary slightly, but Judeans or Judah is always in there. Well, As soon as people started noticing that, then suddenly US academia started saying, oh, well then the stone is fake, even though they found it on their own controlled excavation, and the Smithsonian continued to display it and print it upside down. Well, in recent years, the Cherokee won a U.S. court case to get all of the artifacts and skeleton bones found on that dig back from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian said they couldn't find the bones, but the Cherokee did get the Back Creek stone, but there was a condition attached with it. The Cherokee were told by the court that they had to continue to display the stone as it was in the Smithsonian, upside down. So you think about that. There is a great effort by U.S. academia to prevent people from knowing that there is Middle Eastern ancestry within some ancient Native American tribes. There are some other important artifacts that were found in the 1860s in Ohio near a town called Newark, which are also accused of being fake. I've made a more detailed video on these artifacts as well, called The 10 Commandments in Ancient America, which I'll leave a link to in the description box also. Anyway, they were excavated at a mound builder site by a man named David Wyrick and 7 or 8 other witnesses, and are nicknamed the Newark Holy Stones. The most popular one is called the Decalogue Stone, which was inside the stone case you see behind it, buried with a skeleton at the bottom and center of a very large mound. This stone has the entire 10 Commandments engraved on it in ancient block Hebrew writing. The man in the middle is holding tablets and wearing a turban, and the name above his head says Moshe, which means Moses. The other stone is nicknamed the Keystone, just because that's what it looks like. And it has ancient Hebrew writing on all 4 sides, which says, the King of the Earth, the Word of the Lord, the Laws of Jehovah, and the Holy of Holies. The small stone bowl is also significant because in the Hebrew culture, a vessel was considered impure if it had been made out of clay or something and then cooked to harden. And so if they wanted a pure vessel to hold holy water or oil, they would carve the vessel out of stone. And speaking of the 10 Commandments, Ohio is not the only place where they're found in ancient America. Remember the account earlier in this video from the book The 10 Tribes of Israel about the Native Americans around Lake Superior in the 1800s who had part of the 5 books of Moses written on parchment in a little copper tube passed on from their ancient ancestors through many generations. And again, the mound builders were experts in copper. Well, the 10 Commandments are mentioned all throughout the 5 books of Moses, beginning in the 2nd book, Exodus, when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. Also, the Cheyenne tribe know about the 10 Commandments from their ancient ancestors. And we're about to finally talk about the Cheyenne tribe, but one last thing. The 10 Commandments are also found carved in a boulder in the mountains of Los Lunas, New Mexico. This is another artifact that U.S. academia accuses of being fake. But if you speak with Native Americans in that area who know a lot about it, they'll tell you it was there long before any white explorers came to the area. The stone is still there today, but sadly, somebody vandalized it around 2006 and scratched over the top line. But the rest of it is still legible, and with permission, you can go see it. But that's not all. At the top of the mountain is an ancient fort similar to Fort Masada in Israel. There's also an astronomy carving up there which shows the position of the stars from one night during the year of, I can't remember if it was 107 BC or 107 AD. But how do they know this? Because today there is software which astronomers use that can mathematically calculate where the stars, planets, moons, comets, etc. were at any night in the past, even that far back in time.
For a dam and to outline a man-made lake called today Buckeye Lake, which is still here. If you go there and go fishing, all the stone around Buckeye Lake is from the Great Stack. It was the largest stone mound in North America. Absolutely huge. 10,000 wagon loads to take it completely down. You can imagine. 10,000 wagons to take the stack down. And there's still some of it left on the edge if you know where to go see it. When they got down to the bottom, they did find an earthen mound in the center, and they found some smaller mounds that circled it all the way around. Interesting enough, happened to be 12. Big mound in the center. David Wyrick and 7 or 8 other guys, they went for it right away, dug it straight down, and they ran into a huge oak coffin. They took the oak lid off the coffin, and there was a skeleton of a man laid out. And probably within 30 to 40 minutes, once that had touched the air, everything began really to crumble before their eyes. The bones just started to disintegrate.
Did they close the lid real quick?
No, they didn't.
Dang.
And then they found out that the coffin was laying on a platform of stone and wood. And so they figured, well, let's keep going. Maybe there's more. When they went under the platform and that stone and rock, they found this, see this outer shell? They found that thing, this gray thing, it's in 2 pieces. And that was held together with cement. And it took them some time. They finally got it apart. They can actually see they broke the top off getting it apart, but it's been re-glued back on. You can see this in several places. And inside that gray shell was that black stone. I don't know, I don't remember how soon it happened. It was days or weeks. But David Wyrick finally got it into a man who took it to a person who was a Jewish fellow living in the area, a rabbi. And he said, you know, he said, I can read this. He says, this is Hebrew. And that entire stone has a complete rendition of the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament. I mean, complete. Imagine that, 10 Commandments.
The bridge version?
Pardon now?
The bridge? No, that's what it says there.
Well, I don't know how you...
All
anyway,
of the commandments are there.
All 10 Commandments are here. I think it varied from the King James extremely minor. Not a lot of difference. Pretty much right on. What he pointed out was unusual is the way the letters are written. They're very, how would you say it, very, very squarish. And so just for a simple name, they called it block style. Well, no one had ever seen block style Hebrew. So within a matter of weeks after all this came out, this idea of block Hebrew, because they couldn't find it, then the idea of fraud, hoax. Maybe Wyrick made all this up. Because he was a guy who was a proponent of the North American Indians having a Jewish ancestry. Already highly suspicious in newspapers and academia as it was settled at that time. Even though a lot of people accepted it, a lot of people also didn't want to hear that kind of talk. Especially not after all the problems with Joe Smith in Western New York, if you get my drift. So anyway, David was a defender of the stone. He said this is absolutely authentic and that no one ever claimed that it was, put there, he was accused of him and his guys of making this thing and deceiving people. But he was so attacked in the local newspapers and crucified that he started drinking laudanum. I mean, in a big way. And eventually the laudanum killed him, and we really feel he probably committed suicide because his reputation just went right down the tube.
He was a surveyor.
He was a surveyor. I mean, this guy was a professional guy. He wasn't just some bumpkin out there digging up Indian mounds for relics. He also found this one that's shaped like the letter V, which you look up here. This is a Hebrew written in a more acceptable pattern, and it says the Holy of Holies, Law of God, King of the earth, and the Word of the Lord. All that's on this yellowish looking stone right here. He found both these stones. The yellowish one was found next to the great octagon, which we're going to go to near the end of the day. And I'll show you on a map when we get to the museum where it was found. But this one here is about 12 miles away, maybe 10. It's over headed toward the interstate going to the southwest from here. So now, just to jump forward into our day, when the Six-Day War took place with Arabs and the Jews, well, even though it was short-lived, a group of archaeologists went into the old city right away. Because they just felt, we don't know if we're going to hang on to this or not, but they started digging at the Temple Mount. I mean, immediately. And I mean, the guns weren't, the barrels were still hot. These guys were in there. And they found some stones, and they found some writing on the stones, And what they found was, guess what? Block Hebrew. They dated it 100 BC to 100 AD. It was used for a very short time in Jewish history. And they call it monumental Hebrew. So online, you punch in monumental Hebrew, and this will come up. So David Wyrick did not manufacture this language. Okay? But again, every time something in North America is found showing contact across the pond,
It's a fraud.
it's before Columbus, therefore it can't be here. So it has to be fake.
History of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians of Michigan and Grammar of Their Language by Andrew J. Blackbird, son of the Ottawa chief Makah-da-Penesi. I have also recorded some of the most important legends, which resemble the Bible history, particularly the legends with regard to the Great Flood, which has been in our language for many centuries, and the legend of the great fish which swallowed the prophet Nana-Boju, who came out again alive, which might be considered as corresponding to the story of Jonah in the sacred history. Beside my own personal and our family history, I have also quite extensively translated our language into English, and added many other items which might be interesting to all who wish to inquire into our history and language. I never heard any boy or any grown person utter any bad language, even if they were out of patience with anything. Swearing or profanity was never heard among the Ottawa and Chippewa tribes of Indians, and not even found in their language. Scarcely any drunkenness. Only once in a great while the old folks used to have a kind of short spree, particularly when there was any special occasion of a great feast going on. But all the young folks did not drink intoxicating liquors as a beverage in those days, and we always rested in perfect safety at night in our dwellings, and the doorways of our lodges had no fastenings to them, but simply a frail mat or a blanket was hung over our doorways, which might be easily pushed or thrown one side without any noise of theft or any other mischief was intended. But we were not afraid for any such thing to happen us, because we knew that every child of the forest was observing and living under the precepts which their forefathers taught them. And the children were taught almost daily by their parents from infancy unto manhood and womanhood, or until they were separated from their families. These precepts or moral commandments by which the Ottawa and Chippewa nations of Indians were governed in their primitive state were almost the same as the 10 Commandments which the God Almighty himself delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai on tables of stone. Very few of these divine precepts are not found among the precepts of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, except with regard to the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Almost every other commandment can be found, only there are more, as there were about 20 of these uncivilized precepts. They also believed in their primitive state that the eye of this great being is the sun by day, and by night the moon and stars, and, therefore, that God or the Great Spirit sees all things everywhere, night and day, and it would be impossible to hide our actions, either good or bad, from the eye of this great being. Even the very threshold or crevice of your wigwam will be a witness against you if you should commit any criminal action when no human eye could observe your criminal doing. But surely your criminal actions will be revealed in some future time to your disgrace and shame. Ottawa and Chippewa Indians were not what we would call entirely infidels and idolaters, for they believed that there is a supreme ruler of the universe, the creator of all things, the Great Spirit, to which they offer worship and sacrifices in a certain form. It was customary among them, every spring of the year, to gather all the cast-off garments that had been worn during the winter, and rear them up on a long pole while they were having the festivals and jubilees to the Great Spirit. The object of doing this was that the Great Spirit might look down from heaven and have compassion on his red children. Only this, that they foolishly believe that there are certain deities all over the lands who to a certain extent govern or preside over certain places, as a deity who presides over this river, over this lake, or this mountain or island or country. And they were careful not to express anything which might displease such deities. But they were not supreme rulers, only to a certain extent they had power over the land where they presided. These deities were supposed to be governed by the Great Spirit above.
Gamaliel's interview with Joseph and Mary and others concerning Jesus. The Hagiographa, or Holy Writings found in the St. Sophia Mosque at Constantinople, made by Gamaliel in the Talmuds of the Jews, 27b. He said that he, in making quotations from the prophets, was sometimes mistaken, or his memory failed him, but Jesus could correct him every time without the scroll, and that sometimes he thought Jesus was certainly mistaken, but never in a single instance was he wrong. I asked him to describe his person to me so that I might know him if I should meet him. He said, "If you ever meet him, you will know him. While he is nothing but a man, there is something about him that distinguishes him from every other man. He is the picture of his mother, only he is not her smooth, round face. His hair is a little more golden than hers, though it is as much from sunburn as anything else. He is tall, and his shoulders are a little dropped. His visage is thin and of a swarthy complexion, and though this is from exposure, his eyes are large and a soft blue, and rather dull and heavy. The lashes are long, and his eyebrows very large. His nose is that of a Jew. In fact, he reminds me of an old-fashioned Jew in every sense of the word." Now, I just want to comment here that in the account of Pontius Pilate, in his testimony to Tiberius Caesar of what Yeshua looks like, he gives the exact same description. He describes him as having blue eyes and golden hair. And so, those are two different eyewitnesses of, his physical description, which is something I know a lot of people are interested in. But, people also have their belief, when it comes to his physical description. And so sometimes, even when you have eyewitness account, some are unwilling to hear. A question from Spring Moore. I'm just wondering how close we are to seeing the Antichrist rise and what Jesus actually looked like. In my mind, I see a golden-skinned, dark-haired, dark-eyed man, even though most photos show a light man. Well, according to the descriptions from Pontius Pilate and also from Gamaliel, Christ was said to be a Middle Eastern man, but that he had golden hair and blue eyes, or gray or blue eyes, depending on the lighting. And I realize that a lot of people do believe, and especially amongst the biblical Hebrews, they believe, Christ to be dark-skinned. But, again, that's not what it says in the ancient accounts. This is Valesius's notes, Acta Pilati, or Pilate's report to Caesar of the arrest, trial, and crucifixion of Jesus. And I believe this is the same one that Pilate sent to Tiberius, which was found in the Library of Congress. There was recently, I don't remember, it wasn't long, but that there was this manuscript was also found in the Library of Congress. One day, in passing by the place of Silo, where there was a great concourse of people, I observed in the midst of a group of young men who was in the midst of a group of a young man who was leaning against a tree, calmly addressing the multitude. I was told it was Jesus. This I could easily have suspected. So great was the difference between him and those listening to him. His golden-colored hair and beard gave to his appearance a celestial aspect. He appeared to be about 30 years of age. Nevertheless, have I seen a sweeter or more serene countenance? What a contrast between him and his hearers, with their black beards and many complexions.
A special thank you goes out to the author, L. Taylor Hanson, for these thought-provoking stories. To Elaine Beam, one whose warm friendship and understanding had followed the author and the building of this book legend by legend through study, interview, and travel for over 30 years. And to Lord Kingsborough, who gave his fortune and finally his life to the legend as he died in a debtor's prison. Also to the brave medicine man of the Serai, who was blinded for telling the legend of the healer without the permission of the tribe. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? There is strong evidence to support the fact that he did. Hi, my name is Stephen Sindoni, and I'll be your host for this new series entitled He Walked the Americas. Our first story in this new series is entitled The Legend of the Three Crosses. The golden sandals of the prophet came to Paracas in Peru, South America. As in the land now called Mexico, when he went toward Tula, his coming was announced by trumpeters sounding the conch shells and drummers talking with the tom-toms. For 300 miles from mountain to mountain, in all four directions, the great news traveled. Also, as in the north, the tribesmen answered. Like a flood of churning waters came the people. Down from every mountain hamlet, up from every larger village, along each stream in their ships of balsa, from every direction came the people. On a hillside facing the Bay of Paracas stood the healer, looking down on the surging thousands. The sun shone bright on his mantle of seed silk as he held his arm aloft for silence, giving the sign they knew was his peace sign. The people stilled, expectantly waiting. Then from the earth came the terrible rumble which comes from the roar of the fire god, and the earth began to sway and shake beneath them. The people, frightened, clung together, staring wide-eyed at one another, trying to silence their crying children. In their eyes were unspoken questions. Was the fire god, who dwells in the lava, the red blood of the earth, Musum Kab, showing his anger at this lord of wind and water? Why was he roaring, if not in anger? Only the Pale One stood there silent, unmoved by all the earth shaking, his arms still raised in benediction. Finally silence came to the people. Fear not, my children. My Father who rules the earth and the heavens is not showing his anger. He but shakes the earth to prick my memory. He reminds me that I have a story to tell you. Then the prophet began a strange story, yet he told it so well, with such vivid detail, that each man felt he had once been a witness, and the silence was so thick one could hear it. He told them of a land across the ocean where all men were like him, bearded. He spoke of their houses, their cattle, their clothes and customs, their ships and temples, their metal-clad armies. Then he spoke of a man who had lived there, who healed the people, who taught them and loved them, and in turn was beloved of the people. Yet this man incurred in the priesthood jealousy and anger which ran like a bad sore, corrupting even those who should have known better. He spoke of the power of a wicked nation who bowed down before many idols. Into a court of this nation the man was dragged by his captors. Even the judge could see no wrong in him, but as his enemies called furiously for his life, the judge was forced at last to condemn the prisoner to be hung upon a cross of dead trees, for such was their strange custom. In prison, a man had been lashed and beaten, and when the day arrived for execution, the prisoner had to carry his great cross to a place upon a hilltop, falling down often upon the hot earth, for he was weak from his stay in prison. Some there were who tried to help him, yet there were many who cried out against him with curses that showed their livid hatred, while spit mingled with his bloody bowed head. Thus he dragged his cross to a hilltop. To each side and a little behind him 2 thieves were fastened to crosses, and then the soldiers made him fast to the big cross by driving knives through his 2 hands and raising up the dead trees so that he would hang there until death at last had released him. These thieves cried out to him for a benediction. They were of good heart, even though they had done wrong. Compared to those who had tried to spread hatred and from their own self-minded islands were attempting to stamp him with their own evil, which corrupted their souls like a sore overrunning, these thieves were good, and so he blessed them. Then he asked for a drink as the pain hung on him, and at last, as his head fell forward, he asked forgiveness for all who had wronged him. No sooner had this happened than the earth began heaving. The sun was darkened, and the people ran screaming. The 3 figures swung to and fro on their crosses, and a fierce wind swept over the hilltop. Then, seeing that he was apparently lifeless, the soldiers brought down the great cross, and a man who had been his friend came forward to claim him. This man was wealthy, being the owner of ships which carried goods to the 4 directions on both of the oceans. He had bought a tomb for the humble healer, because he believed his peace religion. To this tomb was the man carried, where he was tended with loving care and laid in a casket. A great rock was rolled against the entrance, lest some try to do him further evil. Yet when the woman came there weeping, behold, the stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. For a short few days some said they had seen him, and then he was seen no more. Thus, my children, does the Almighty protect the man who carries his message, and not even one of the earth's greatest nations in all its might has the power to kill him while he follows the wishes of the Almighty. So too is it with me, and when just now the earth started shaking, it was to remind me of this story which my Father had laid upon my heart to tell you, so that you may know more about this peace religion. It is said that when he finished speaking, the people could see behind him upon the hillside the shadow of 3 crosses. After he had gone, the people still seemed to see 3 crosses, so stonemasons began the work of carving them deeper upon the hillside, so that the children of their children would still remember. Today, if you go to the Bay of Paracas and look across at the hillside, you may still see the 3 crosses. The great cross in the center is 600 feet tall, while the smaller 2 are at each side of the cross. There is a line which ties each of the smaller crosses to the great cross. These huge carvings are indeed strange crosses. They resemble dead trees with limbs turned upward, like arms raised in supplication. Scientists stare at them in utter amazement. Solemnly they admit their antiquity. These works probably date from the age of Jesus. But the meaning? That escapes these men who are learned. They can only shake their heads in wonder. The meaning is beyond their understanding. Did Jesus walk in the Americas as told by a Native American woman in Peru? In part 2 of this series, I will share another story that may provide more evidence for the life and teachings of Jesus in the Americas. In today's program, I continue the series, He Walked the Americas, with our second story from the L. Taylor Hanson book entitled The Land of the Woman. Our story takes place in the Yucatan. After his visit to the city of Ekbalem, the healer went to the land of the woman. The queen of this land was lovely, cruel, and heartless, with skin the color of old ivory and hair as blue as the wing of a raven. Her hands were as smooth as the skin of a baby, yet she ruled with a fist of iron, and there was none to gainsay her. When her scouts informed her that the great healer was coming, her eyes narrowed, and her smile was that of the tigress. "If we do not greet this stranger," she told her courtiers, as she called upon them into council, "the people may turn at last against us, for they think him divine, and as you know, they have named him, among other titles, the Lord of Wind and Water. On the other hand, if we do entertain him and allow him to fashion a temple, he may change our manner of living, or so devoutly win the people that they will no longer obey us. Therefore, we cannot entertain him." "Then off with his head," shouted the courtiers. "Nay, not so fast. It is said that none can touch him, for his eyes hold his enemies like one frozen in a trance." "Then we will ambush him with arrows." "Have you not forgotten something? At his wish the wind and air obey him. We still have another weapon. With poisoned lances we can spear him." "He would use the serpent's weapons, remember? He can walk on water." The courtiers stood abashed by her. "You mean there is no way to kill him?" "There is one way which you have not mentioned. We shall invite him to the palace. As a prince we shall entertain him. Then the night when he first eats at our table, he shall be given the seat of honor." "Ah!" the courtiers sighed in understanding. "When he arises to speak unto us," she purred with the smile of the tigress, "the guard at the door knows my signal. As usual, it is to be the clap of my two hands. That will signify the trapdoor is to be released. He will find himself in a dungeon, and from this one, as you will know, no man in all of our history has ever come forth into the land of the living." Thus was it planned, and as the prophet entered the city, the adoring people rained flowers upon him. The army of the woman came forth to greet him and escorted him in splendor to the palace. He was given a room with a sunken tile bath through which ran an unending stream of warmed and perfumed water, and upon his sleeping couch were laid out for him fresh, clean garments made by the loving hands of the people in anticipation of his coming. There were always many to choose from whenever he came to another nation. That afternoon on the palace rooftop, as he came out to address the people, suddenly the mountain over the city began to belch dark smoke from its summit. The people turned their eyes wide with fear, whispering to one another, "Why is this fire god angry? Is it because he comes among us?" But the pale one, also watching the mountain, raised his arm in his sign of peaceful greeting. With soft words he blessed the mountain. He spoke to the people of its beauty, with its hair of ice and its soft cloud blankets. He told them to fashion their lives in beauty, so that when they came to the land of shadows, there would be no unhappy things to remember. That night all went as planned at the banquet. The healer was given the seat of honor. No one seemed to notice that he spoke very little, that he toyed with his food, but did not eat it, and when at last the eating was finished, with all the laughter and entertainment, the prophet arose and stared at the courtiers. From face to face went the gray-green eyes, until the silence lengthened into unnaturalness. Then suddenly the woman arose, staring imperiously upon him. She clapped her ivory-smooth hands, and the prophet fell into the dungeon. Thus had spoken the woman. Then she laughed with high-pitched peals of laughter, which echoed throughout the palace, down the corridors lit by the swinging torches, and up to the high-beamed ceiling. At first uneasy were the eyes of the courtiers, then one by one they began to join her. Robustly the guards in her army laughed, and finally all the courtiers above them all laughed the woman. "Yea," thus had spoken the woman. Then spoke the mountain. With a crash heard into the enemy kingdoms, the whole top of the mountain exploded. Gone was his headdress of ice-white feathers, gone were the soft cloud blankets, and as the tiger shakes the monkey, so the mountain shook the city. Within the palace, which had rung with laughter, but a breath before the explosion, the great walls swayed and crumbled. Sputtering fireflies, the torches flew into the rubble of cement and stucco. Down came the beams on the banquet table, crushing the wildly screaming courtiers, clinging insanely to one another, even as gophers are crushed when Condora, the lightning, crashes down a forest monarch under whose roots had been their runaways. Only two escaped, a guard and the woman. Where one torch still was crazily swinging, she ran down the corridors screaming. Following her came the long shrieks of horror of the dying. Above the fury of the mountain and the crash of falling rock and stucco was heard that hideous prelude of death. Into the streets tumbled the people. There they saw two single figures. One was a prophet standing bareheaded and gazing quietly toward the mountain. The other was a guard from the palace, injured and burned from those moments of terror, crawling abjectly toward the healer, babbling out an incoherent story and pointing toward the ruins of the palace. Into the streets staggered the people, carrying their injured and crying children, gazing in unbelief at the mountain, a flaming torch against the heavens, lighting the sky like a red sun or a monstrous fiery fountain, flinging upward stars of fury, which danced grotesquely about the crimson moon and returned to earth in a blazing curtain. On the ruins of the palace stood the Pale One, his robe untouched by the rain of cinders. Then he waved the people toward him and, turning, walked away from the city. Clinging to each other they followed, stumbling through the thickened fog of ashes. All night they walked away from the mountain, resting but once to crowd around him, while he healed their wounds and stroked the burned ones, making whole the flesh beneath his fingers. Then on again to the land of Panuco, near a mighty river, where they stopped and built another city. Here a great pyramid temple was dedicated to the prophet and the mountain. To this day in the land of Panuco, one can still hear the legend of how the healer came to the land of the woman and was saved from death by the flaming mountain. The place of destruction is called the Land of the Red Moon, and the ruins are untouched by the spades of strangers. If one is trusted by the people, they will tell a curious story. When the moon is full, say the people, strange things happen at the places of destruction. Strangers who go there and stay through the night, when the moon lights up the desolation, swear they can look into the palace. There a torch is crazily swinging as if still heaving from an earthquake, and a woman is heard madly running, followed by wild peals of laughter, which re-echo throughout the ruined city, ending in stricken shrieks of horror. No stranger will stay there more than one night, and they always hurriedly leave the country. Is there anyone who will confirm this story? No, for not one of the people could be induced by gifts or money to lead a party to the place of destruction when the moon is full and the woman is laughing. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? In part 3 of this series, I will share another story that may provide additional evidence for the life and teachings of Jesus in the Americas. Our story today is entitled The Seneca Legend. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Many Native American tribes say that he did. Interestingly enough, most all the tribes have a story to tell about the white-bearded prophet who dressed in white and wore sandals. And here is where our story begins. Once while in the capital city, the prophet heard tales of the Sunrise Ocean and the 5 tribes of warring nations. At once he expressed a desire to see them, for much opposed to war was the healer, so he went forth with the merchants. Across the mighty Alleghanies the pale god came to the Seneca nation. There he called the chieftains into council. Long he spoke to them on the ways of his father, as he had throughout the broad land, handling the language with great ease. He explained his peace religion, then he asked of them quite simply what was the reason for their warfare. The fire chieftains were embarrassed, for they had long forgotten the reason, if indeed they ever had a reason. Each warrior looked upon the other, and none could think of a valid answer. Therefore he bound them ceremonially into a never-ending alliance. To each he gave a sacred duty to perform for the alliance, and then he asked them to smoke the peace pipe, filled with tobacco and cedar shavings, and to blow the smoke to the 4 directions, making the sign of the great cross, which is a holy symbol. Never from that time onward have the 5 nations fought each other, nor has the trust he gave them been cracked and broken. At this council was a Seneca chieftain who was tall, for we are a tall nation. Like many of our people, he had a lofty stature and could easily look down on the heads of the others. Indeed, the prophet was not a short man, but neither was he as tall as the chieftain. The Seneca, seeing that he was the tallest, and could look over the light hair of the pale god, rose and waited to speak. There was a shocked silence. Would he presume to question the prophet? The chieftain looked upon the healer. I have been watching you while you were speaking, O one whom the people call the Dawn God. It is true that you hold the most strange fascination over the minds of men. I know that the people call you the Dawn God. If it is true, then you can prove it. Meet me here in 4 days in the early morning, before the sun has shot its first long red arrow, and we shall stand before this door together. If the first red arrow of the dawn light touches your hair before it paints my eagle feather, then indeed you are the Dawn God. This I give to you as a challenge. Now, for this day, I have spoken. Everyone turned to look at the prophet. He sat quiet still, as if in deep thought. At last, he arose. Your stand is well taken. I will meet you here before the dawning. When from the sunrise ocean arises the golden light of the dawn star, I will be standing here before the great lodge. I will use up the moments of waiting to talk once more with the people, all who would care to hear me, for now I too have spoken. During the 4 days the healer went among the tribes, and though he did not speak of his appointment, everyone knew that he would keep it, for the Great One never broke a promise. Accordingly, at the time appointed, great crowds swarmed about the small mound where the great lodge stood open to the eastward. First to climb the mound was the prophet. As over the horizon arose the first golden shafts of the golden star, the pale god spoke to the assembled nations. It is said that he always charmed his listeners, but now there was almost a breathless silence. Indeed, it seemed the very trees were listening, and also the assembled animals of the forest. So softly he spoke, and so well did they hear him, because of the silence they had settled. Now the tall chieftain left the others and slowly climbed the small mound, taking his place beside the prophet. The 2 eagle feathers in the hair of the chieftain projected well above the head of the healer, but no sign except a friendly greeting was given by the pale Hiwasa, who turned and began the chant of the dawning. This was a prayer chant he had taught the people, which had long since been forgotten. Everyone started to join in, and then suddenly a miracle happened. Before anyone else saw the sunlight, a golden shaft of radiant beauty came down from some clouds, banked high with firelight, and touched the curling hair of the prophet, diffusing itself like a halo until he stood, a luminous creature, painting all the ground around him with gold. The people then fell down, saying, "Behold, he is indeed the dawn god who has come to walk among us, and he draws his power from the star of the dawning." The tall chieftain, seeing the great one clothed in gold light, knelt in the dust beside him, and taking the hem of the prophet's mantle, laid his cheek on the line of creases. The meaning of Hiwasa, it is he from afar off. It is our name for the prophet, who drew his great strength from the dawn star. All nations know he was of the dawn star, and that is why, even now, no nation of the ancient people, known as the Redskins, will ever make war or fight a battle while the sacred star of peace is still shining in the great heavens. They dare not, for it is the star of the prophet. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Seneca legends say that he did. Our story today is entitled An Old Chippewa Speaks, and here is where our story begins. From his seat cross-legged upon his blanket arose the old warrior marksman. For a moment he awaited the tribute of silence. A mighty specimen of manhood was Marksman. Although in years he was almost 80, his figure had the lynx grace of the young man. His long hair, neatly braided, still had the sheen of the blackbird. His teeth were as strong and white as his grandson's, and his eyes were still keen for the signs of the game trail. It is well tonight that we speak of the pale god, and fitting as well that we counsel with others, greeting our enemies as brothers, for such would have been the wish of the prophet. I have heard some talk among the lodges that the Lord of Wind and Water was but a myth brought down by the old ones from times beyond our present reckoning. That is true. What a strange legend. If the youth among our people doubt the wide-flung strength of this ancient story, look about at his symbols from tribe to tribe across the broad land. Have you ever wondered about the cedar? Why does every tribe revere it? Why do the high priests mix its shavings with the leaves of our tobacco? To enhance its power, they will tell you. And why do we blow its smoke across our bodies when we are returning from the war trail? Is it not to ask his forgiveness, as was once taught by the pale god? Why do we plant these trees upon the great mounds, those ancient histories of our cities? Was it not to warn all men that once he walked here, the sacred one, the miracle worker? And the color of snow, among all the nations it stands for peace. Why is this so? Because he wore it. From nation to nation he taught the people to live in peace and to speak in council, thus settling all their problems. This was his way, and the way of his father. Why do we raise our hands up in greeting? Because that was his peace sign, a tradition which we still follow. Why do we use the cross as a sacred symbol? Was it not because he wore it about the hem of his full white garment, and carried the sign on his 2 hands, those hands so gifted in healing? How many here have ever seen the Sundance? I know that our brothers, the Cheyenne and Dakota, probably bear its scars on their bodies. Let us consider for a moment this strange dance, a self-torturing agony of suffering as danced by the young men. The ancient ones have told us that once this was a flying dance about a high pole, and that it came from the old red land, now forlornly sunken for many ages below the green waves of the ocean. Perhaps it once belonged to the wind god, which the serpents made a dance of sacrifice in the times long banished, many cycles before the prophet's coming. This seems very probable because the prophet must have changed it and made it a dance of penance. Today, as a sacrifice for their people, the young men allow the thongs from the tall pole to be tied under a 2-finger-wide strip by opening the skin of each breast, then dancing night and day for 4 days until they drop and are again freed from the suffering of the sun dance. Is it not strange that we hang our young men thus in pain upon a dead tree? I know not why, but what we feel that a blessing or a righting or wrong is certain to follow. Our tribe no longer dances the sun dance, but we still remember the prophet. In the Wissaku Lodge and many others, there are some who still know his secret language, but those things are being fast forgotten. Yet to him who walked away through the silver moon frost across the winter's snowy blanket toward the north, where now is Canada, and many other tribes of our people, I bid you see him as we saw this man. From the pines dripped ice like unlit candles as he walked away. His snowy garments made him seem wreath-like, while his long hair was silvered by his frost breath. 2 wolves followed behind him, one of dark fur and one of silver. We knew that they would not harm him, for he had a strange power over the animals, the fiercest seeking the touch of his fingers. Thus he left us, and to him I raised the peace pipe, the tobacco mixed with cedar shavings, and blow the smoke to the 4 directions, thus making the sign of his cross, for tonight I have spoken. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Old Chippewa legends say that he did. Our story today is entitled, The Legend of the Sacred City, and here is where our story begins. Next to rise before the assemblage was an aged man whose hair had been whitened by more than 100 winters. Seldom does one see white hair among the red men, and when one does, it is almost a certainty that his snowy summit was attained at 100. He was reverently introduced by an old Chippewa who called him by the title of my grandfather, a term of the highest respect among the red men. His costume was unknown to my interpreter. The leather of whitest doeskin was embroidered by the dyed quills of the porcupine, and his moccasins were beautifully beaded. Perhaps Sac and Fox, or Menominee, whispered my interpreter, or again he may be of the Canadian Northwoods, or from a tribe now facing extinction, of whom perhaps he is the last high priest. How do you know that he is a high priest? See you not the winged fan from the sacred eagle? You asked me here to speak of the healer and the ancient days of our people's greatness. I was surprised to receive such an invitation. Are our young men having a change of spirit? Since when have they listened to the chanting? Have they ceased their love of white man whiskey, truly known as devil water, which loses their tongues and makes them foolish? Yea, it is true my heart is bitter, but I came not here to give a lecture. Let white man keep his reason stealer, for in time it will bewitch him. I came to take back to the ancients and to the times of our people's greatness. I have thought of taking the legends with me even unto the land of shadows, but the young man who came so far to seek me reasoned well before the fire. He said I had no right to take them, for they belonged to all our people, as long as one red man walked the planet. They must go on past this generation and to that unborn soul who might be listening and wishing to walk back to the ancients. Therefore, tonight I am here to take you walking back through the dawn star cycles to a time long distant when the land was not as you see it, past the memories of our grandfathers' grandfathers. I take you with me to the days of the healer and the times of our people's greatness. These were the days when the crests of our histories whirled through many cities, always near the mighty rivers, avenues of ancient commerce. Coming north from our capital city, where the Mississippi meets the Missouri, in the long boats of the traders, the prophet made his journey toward the city we called Sacred. This was an ancient metropolis. Before we built its mound of extinction, after the great civil war of the Turtles, 96 dynasties of rulers had lived there, long and eventful history. Like the capital, it had strawberry carpets about all the buildings built upon the great crests, and from them the streets radiated outward among the dwellings of the people. This city was called Sacred because it was in the center of the cross of waters, from whence ran the rivers to the 4 oceans. East to the sunrise ran the waters, and northward to the sea of dancing lights. To the west beyond the great divide, the waters ran to the sea of the sunset, while the Missouri and the Mississippi ran to the southern sea, the Sea of the Caribs. To this, the city of the great cross of waters, up the river called the Father of Waters, one golden morning, came the healer. The dawn cascaded down upon him as he left the ships of the merchants, painting his hair and beard with beauty and lighting up his lofty features. The streets were mosaicked with flowers strewn in homage on the path before him as he walked toward the temple. Greatly beloved now was the pale god, known as the Lord of Wind and Water. His every move bespoke his kindness, his every touch revealed his divinity, and before him all the people bowed down. Through rows of worshippers he moved to the temple in quiet solemnity, holding up his hand in blessing, that hand with a strange palm marking, for through it was engraved the true cross which he had taken as a symbol. There at the temple he abode among us, though he often rode away with the merchants, or more often walked to distant villages, holding in his hand his great staff, and stopping to speak with all the people, from the aged to the children. Once there was a great stir among the villages. Messages had been flashed with obsidian mirrors and the smoke puffs of more distant signals. They spoke of an array of nobles who were coming to the sacred city from a land called Golden Tolan. At first the people were much frightened, for though long had we traded with distant Tolan, yet if these emissaries were to be followed by their mighty metal-clad armies, the Puan cities would be lost. The prophet was the least disturbed. He gathered about him a council of the merchants, and soon he mastered the Toltec language. These men in peace were coming northward. He told the frightened people, and shortly the messages confirmed his story. Before long, well confirmed were his statements. Indeed, they were coming to take back the healer to the city of Golden Tula, a fantastic place of magnificent beauty. Grand preparations were made to receive the emissaries, long with the lines of chanters, the dances most elaborate, and much practice went on with conch shell trumpets, flutes, and tom-toms for the grand celebration. Then at last the day dawned, and the longboats were sighted coming up the river. In the lead, as was proper, came the ships of the Puans, laden down with goods of commerce, and following them the ships of the Mayans and some other forgotten peoples. At last came the beautiful ships of Tolan. From that first ship came the guards all clothed in metal, and then a ship loaded of glittering musicians played upon many strange instruments of music. The last two ships were filled with the emissaries. Most lordly stepping were those nobles, as they came down from ships' houses, and all the people were hushed with admiration. Long and thick were their emerald feathers, unlike any seen by the Puans. Flowing backward like rippling water, their costumes were made of colored cotton embroidered with gold, with pearl and emeralds, and even their sandals were shining with beauty. Proudly they walked behind their honor guard as they made their way to the great temple, where framed in the painted great log doorway the prophet stood quietly, waiting with his shining hair and wearing his snow-white mantle embroidered with crosses about the hemline. It is said that the strangers brought many presents, among which were snowy garments and a pair of golden sandals, which indeed he wore forever after. The Mayans, too, laid gifts before him and received from him the blessing. However, when after 4 days passed the ships departed without the healer, the joy of the people was tempered with sorrow when they learned that the pale god had given his promise to go one day soon to Tolan, after he had visited first with other nations. The Mayans, too, and the other peoples all returned happily down the river, for they all carried back a promised visit. For them this was a thing for rejoicing, and it was a well-known fact that the healer never broke a promise. The prophet went both north and west with his long staff, in his golden sandals, and his snowy garments, and never more was seen by the Puan peoples. But word came back some 4 years later that he was on his way to Tolan, where a kingly reception awaited his coming. He went by the way of the Chihuahua Valley, which means the highway of ancient power. Then came the fabulous tales of the merchants of his entrance into Tolan, when on a day that has never been equal since among all nations the earth stood hushed and breathless, when that wondrous divinity we call the Pale God walked down the highway into Golden Tolan. It is sad for me to retell this story, for the memory of the present comes through to haunt me as if in terrible mockery, yet I chant it for you. The young men who listen and for generations will again retell it. on into the cycles of the future, as long as the son of our blood still walks the planet. Thus for you of this night, and for those even more distant in time from those living this hour, I have spoken. In bitterness had I sworn that these pictures would fade with the brain which carried them forward, but it is true that I had no right to think that, and so I released them into the future, to that perhaps unborn soul who will listen and love them, as I, when a boy, would crouch listening about the firelight and walk enraptured in spirit through a day so long vanished. I too have spoken. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Old Canadian Northwood legends say that he did. Our story today is entitled The Bowstring of Power, and here is where our story begins. As the Lord of Wind and Water, Quetzalcoatl, the quiet healer, found himself the most powerful ruler, for if great Rome had clashed with Tula in that day when the star of each was brightest, mighty Rome would have met her master. No guess is this, but based on a Toltec secret, a certain means of hardening copper beyond the strength of white man's steel, a secret which perished with the Toltecs and now lives only in tradition, that limbo of things long forgotten. To the master came the bowstring of power. It was unmasked and embarrassingly unexpected. His least wish was anticipated. His word was law, his desires unquestioned. He set about choosing 12 disciples, as he had done with each previous nation. From among them he would leave a leader who would carry on his office after the prophet had departed. He had a small pyramid uncovered where along the olden stairway were the sinuous bodies of giant serpents. These he knew were the symbols of water, so he ordered their scales refinished with emerald, shining iridescent among the gold work in the sunlight. On their unlifted heads he placed plumes of gold and silver, of metal so fine, spun they seemed not to be metal, but truly the wind clouds over the oceans. This temple he dedicated to the one God, whom he called the Great Spirit, the Mighty One, who has no image. Then he changed the Toltec temples, removed were the idols, gone the sacrifices, finished were the rooms with lovely mosaics, each room in the color of its own direction. South was finished in silver and living pearl, with scrolls of paradise feathers, while the rooms of the west, symbolizing the sunset ocean, was done in shades of turquoise and emerald, with feather scrolls from Zeatol and other birds of bluish iridescence. For him they abandoned slavery, and they also changed their dances so that the anciently honored rituals became instead rich living prayers, moving in song and color. For 5 days the ceremonies lasted, as they had in times long vanished. Only now the people were happy, gone were the horrors of war, slavery, hatred, and bloody sacrifices, and the people felt like singing. He organized great choruses of singers which chanted from mountain to mountain, accompanied by orchestras of musicians. He brought in long wood and metal marimbas, pans, pipes, made into 4-man organs, and harps and flutes from other nations with instructors in the art of playing them, while drums of many types and sizes made up the percussion section, together with conch shells, rattles, and other instruments of depth and sweetness, liquefying the air with music. A tale is told of how a captain returning to Tula with his successful army found instead of the usual welcome and the sacrifice of the chained captives a peculiar disinterest in war and fighting. The captives were returned home with presents. Even the temples were strangely different. Disgruntled, he gathered his men about him and murmured so loud at these conditions that during the evening came a summons. The captain was escorted to the temple. There in the silence of the torches stood a number of white-robed figures, one of whom came forward toward him. No longer did the very walls reek of horror, but were exquisite with color and a perfumed scent of cedar. And there among them, alone save for his distant disciples, waited the healer. The captain stopped and stared about him. He was no prisoner being brought to trial, as indeed his men had hinted. These men were unarmed. In fact, only he, as was due his profession, carried a short sword, sharp as a razor, and only he had shield and helmet. Yet there was something about this person, this foreign usurping stranger who had hypnotized the Toltecs, this man they called the Feathered Serpent, lord over wind and water, which protected him far more than weapons. The captain stopped in strange confusion, and so well had he practiced his speech, so loudly had his men cheered him. His speech of anger held all his convictions, and now the words were gone, vanished like the winter snow upon the mesas. "There is no need for you to tell me," he heard a soft, rich voice saying. "I know your thoughts, and you have your point. You fear for your country. Yet you are mistaken. You are trying to bind an infant so that it will always fit the cradle. Your enemy is not those harassed wild tribes. Your enemy is the law of the jungle. Convert these people and make them happy. Then there will be no need of your army." The captain thought bitterly of the future. With this dreamer in the temple, where would his country end? The prophet answered in a strange language. His disciples, who had been listening at a respectful distance, stared at one another. "In memory, young Makoa, I am in a tangled jungle, where a little boy was clawed by a tiger." The jaw of the captain sagged in amazement, and he lifted his head and stared at the healer with eyes puzzled and unbelieving. Then again, Quetzal spoke in Toltec. "It is not this or that nation which matters. Tribes will change, they merge and mingle. To look through the eyes of the tribe is the small view. Yea, Tula will die, as will Ekbalam. Other great nations will grow and vanish, but their blood will go on living. You think I seek the bowstring of power? For what? Food, fame, carnal living? The first two I have never lacked. With the last I have no interest because it is not of my Father. With the means of life I am the teacher. The ends belong to the Almighty." Slowly the captain kneeled to the marble, took off his helmet, unbuckled his short swords, and upon them laid his famed shield, whispering in a husky voice and awestruck, "Forgive a mind which has been blinded. Forgive me, O Teotihuacan." This legend was told to the author L. Taylor Hanson by several Indians with an interpreter at the site of the ruins of Teotihuacan. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Old Mexican legends say that he did. Our story today is entitled Entrance into Tula, and here is where our story begins. When the prophet came to Tula, he was in the peak of his glory, because his fame had come to him like a ghost before him, before ever his sandals of gold had led him along the highway to Tula. It is said that he paused on the passes, gazing long upon the golden rooftops, glowing in the early morning sunrise, like a frozen sea of lava glistening in copper-gold eruption. Already everywhere the people were waiting, covering the lands up to the mountains, lining the highways, singing and chanting. The stories had brought out the masses from 1,000 miles far distant, and emptied all the towns and villages. Long had they known that he loved flowers, and now they filled the air with perfume, raining blossoms down upon him. This rain grew thicker as he moved toward Tula. Heavy flower carpets paved the highway. Roses, violets, tiger lilies, moon roses, golden poppies, showy hibiscus, and dewy orchids lay in the most intricate patterns, mosaic before the tread of his sandals. Then, as soon as they had walked over them, the people ran out and scrambled for them, hoping to keep a single petal, which might have been borne his weight for a moment. From far beyond the outer ramparts stretched the homes of stucco, the edifices and markets of distant Tula. Some were built on the pyramid order, where one man's roof is another's garden. Usually they were filled with ferns and flowers, for the Toltecs loved their beauty, and tinkling streams of tumbling water, which ran down a hard tilted stream bed from roof to roof. Now they were filled with Toltecs. Then at last he came to the Great Wall. There in black and orange, gray and crimson, verdigris, blue and raspberry, every possible hue of the rainbow, moved the costumes of the Toltecs, flashing with their jeweled embroideries as they changed their places and rose to see him better. Along the wall, holding over 100,000 people, the prophet moved toward the gateway, where waited the courtiers and the monarch. resplendent in their plumed headdresses, to escort him into Tula. At the gateway he paused a moment to gaze upon its fabulous beauty. Then he passed through the ponderous portals of metal, encrusted with their pearls and emeralds, and from the throats of 1,000,000 people came a roar like to an ocean, bursting through the mouths of the Toltecs, as the monarch bowed low before him and escorted him into Tula the Golden. He was led to the great hill of loud outcrying known as old Tiza Tizi Tepec, the last word meaning mountain, which then towered above the Golden City. From here he was given a seat of honor, where he could watch the ceremonial dances given in his honor, with the dancers chanting the Toltec welcome. But it was when he started to speak, then a miracle happened. Never before to a great distance could the voice of one man be carried, but from the hilltop to beyond the sea, to the wall and onto the mountains went forth his beautiful voice, his musical voice, speaking in Toltec. It is said that after his greeting he plainly derided the masters, calling on them to renounce slavery. "Do you expect," the healer said, "to enter into the gates of heaven, carried upon the backs of your servants?" Then he spoke of their enemy people in the light of understanding. He told them of his distant travels and why there should not be war and pillage. He told them of these people they hated, and how with only love he had tamed them. No one who ever stood in his presence and heard that voice of compelling magic which swept away all opposition could ever again forget the healer. And so it was that day in Tula. The head plums of the Toltecs were bowed, and in mass were they converted. Did Jesus walk in the Americas among these ancient peoples? Our next story will shed more light on that. Our story today is entitled The Prophecy of Tula, and here is where our story begins. Some shimmering bits of his last oration with its strange revelations of the future have come down to us from that bitter evening when Quetzal bid farewell to his weeping Toltecs. Usually he spoke at dawn, but this time it was almost twilight, and the weather seemed to fit the mood of the moment. Many were the tears mingled with the raindrops. Many were the shoulders drooping when at the sound of the conch shell trumpet, Quetzal climbed for the last time the hill of loud outcrying. He began by naming his successor, the new Quetzalcoatl, one of the most saintly from his priesthood. This had been known for the ritual of ordination, of laying of hands, and of the crown of Quetzal feathers, had been going on for days and evenings. Then at last he began speaking. He told them of his deep-felt sadness, for even as he was loved here, so did he love Tula. Here the happiest hours of his lifetime had been spent with his beloved Toltecs, but a strange burden had been laid upon him, and he could not endure its dark foreboding. He began to speak of the visions. They were not of the present, but of the future. Even Tula was becoming a nightmare. The Toltecs gasped in consternation. How could Tula be a nightmare? He began his explanation. Though he lived in the present, yet did the future press in around him. This was the real reason for leaving Tula, not the silly ones given by tongues which were wagging. These strange visions were growing upon him. Even stronger were they among the wild tribes, driving down the reason for what he was seeing. They had to do with the sacrificers. Even these visions were growing upon him. Even more clearly could he see the distance, even to the dates. Now his vision was sweeping the third cycle, long after the fall of Tula. The Toltecs gasped aloud in horror. Nay, not by war as you are thinking. This city's end shall come with an earthquake, many generations distant. Restless drums within the mountains are the dancing sacrificers. The prophet Quetzal is but a memory. Forgotten is Tehuacan. Let this be a sign unto you. Closely watch Popo, the smoker. When he seems restless, forsake your Tula, but take your books and all your learning. Have caves ready deep within the jungles. There leave them for the future ages. As I speak now from the mountain and look into the plaza of the immortals, I see a different golden city. The people have drifted from the one God, and strange revelries are held in Tula. Quetzal is but a name in history. Then comes a retribution. With flames the mountains begin to speak. This peak where I am standing, known to men as Tiza Tizi Tepec, hill of loud outcrying, shall explode in fire. Then no man shall see it forever after. With horrible growling shall the land be shaken, furiously as a wolf does shake the rabbit. By day the light of the sun shall be darkened, and by night a new volcano shall cover the sky with comets of red fire. Down shall tumble all the temples, and the walls of the houses become as rubble. Thus shall end this proud city, and with it the power of mighty Toland. When the stag has fallen, the wolf pack is brave. Now shall come the sacrificers, marching to power throughout the broad land. Armies shall come to Tula for plunder, but the jewels are there for the taking. Thus begins another cycle, called the cycle of the sacrificers. For a while this was the end of visions, but then I saw another cycle. Tonight we shall walk there together. Remember to tell your children so that they in turn may warn their offspring. Down from the north come men brandishing axes and taking war dogs into battle. They are the first wave of many invasions, and they are known as Chichimencas, from the warlike dogs who go with them to battle. They are met by the restless serpent, the takers of men, the sacrificers. Long have I tried to teach these children, but they now turn their heads away from my precepts. They make war but for the captives, as it has been from time forgotten. Horror shall come to the broad land. All shall dwell in fear of that black-robed priesthood who kill their captives to feed their idols. Daily my father's law is broken. Hourly do the great stones drip with fresh blood, because they think these rocks should be nourished. Watching this cycle of sacrificing is a heavy burden to my soul. Poor, pitiful, misled people, listen carefully, that you may tell them my words after Quetzal is but a memory. There is a cycle beyond this one. If they do not heed this warning, before that cycle comes unto them, there is a man pale of feature, and like unto me bearded. Trust him not. He is not Quetzal. He leads the sacrificers into battle. He calls himself Huitzilpochtli, the bearded one who conquers. He shall later meet with a great warrior, and shall himself become a sacrifice to the idol of the tiger. There is a cycle beyond this one. If they do not heed this warning, before that cycle comes unto them, there is a man pale of feature, and like unto me bearded. Trust him not. He is not Quetzal. He leads the sacrificers into battle. He calls himself Huitzilpochtli, the bearded one who conquers. He shall later meet with a great warrior, and shall himself become a sacrifice to the idol of the tiger. Now the sacrificers march to power. Go, my people, to the jungles. Hide your treasures in the deep caves, especially the ancient histories. Most books have gone into hiding as the cycle spirals in horror, except those spared by the bloody priesthood. Learning has been conquered by the law of the jungle, but each day speeds the retribution. Mark you well, for there shall be portents. A strange star shall cross the heavens, and all the people looking upward, as the time grows even closer, shall remember tonight and the words of Quetzal. To one another they shall whisper, I fear the time has come upon us. Woe unto the sacrificers. The year is that of Titak Patel, when the dark star, Sitlalpal, sometimes called Telaskalpan Tekuli, crosses the sun for its 13th crossing. After the fall of Tula, then will you know this cycle is ended. That you may remember what I am saying, I have caused to be carved a giant dark boulder, highly polished and marked forever with the Dawn Star's future cycles. This rock has been placed in the temple. Massive is the rock and well calculated to survive the time of earthquakes and pillage far into the time of the future. Upon the top is the 13th Akadal. Remember this date. It is the time of warning. With the binding dates comes a retribution. Stand with me in the ear of Titak Patel. Look across the sunrise ocean. 3 ships come like great birds flying. They land. Out come men in metal garments carrying rods which speak with thunder and kill at a distance. These men are bearded and pale of feature. They come ashore, and I see them kneeling. Above them I see a great cross standing. That is well. If these men are true to the symbol they carry, you need have no fear of them, for no one who is true to that symbol will ever carry it into battle. Therefore, hold aloft your great cross, and go forth to meet them. They cannot fail to know that symbol, and will not fire their rods upon it, nor upon these who stand in its shadow. Well, they know that what is done to my people is done also unto me. The prophet hesitated a moment, and then he continued more softly. When the years have come to their full binding, the metal-tipped boots of the strangers will be heard in all the bloody temples. Then throughout the broad land has begun the third cycle. As yet, I cannot see beyond it. This is why I am leaving Tula. There is much work to be done among the wild tribes to turn heavy-handed destiny from them. I leave you then the most fundamental law of my father for your guiding life pattern. Always love one another. For this night, Kate Zal has spoken. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Native American legend says that he did. In our next story, we will feature Jesus' travels through the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Our story today is entitled The Departure, and here is where our story begins. 4 days passed, and the crowds who were waiting watched the sunlight reflect on the vessel from the gently heaving water, coating with gold as shining serpents, or the moon, cool shining, painting the vessel with brushes of silver. Still they had not seen the healer. Then came a morning that was different. From far away arose a strange new sighing, borne on the wind from afar off, like the torrent of a distant river. The people who had been waiting looked into each other's eyes and nodded. This is the day of his departure. Closer came the lamentations like the surge of a flood onrushing, and a wave of people engulfed the highway. The cries came from the throats of untold thousands, jostling each other for a place of vantage. Yet the greatest noise was still in the distance. Louder and stronger, it kept approaching, greater than any sounds of the jungle, more mighty than the wildest windstorms, deep-throated like advancing rapids. Onward came the human torrent, and above it the plaintive sighing like the churning of a river as it fell downward over a steep cliff into the splash of a million raindrops. Now the priesthood was making a pathway, trying to hold back the people. Through this path came the conch shell marchers, followed by the deep-sounding tom-toms, then the tall and powerful oarsmen who walked up to the vessel and drew up stiffly there beside it. Next came the great men of all nations, led by the monarch of the Toltecs, resplendent in his magnificent costume and his vast assemblage of courtiers. Came the Chichimecs, the Iztays, the Aztecs, and many others. Some were distant, unheard-of nations in strange and colorful costumes, garbed in every shade of the rainbow, some flashing with embroidery and jewels, some clothed partially with leather and trimmed in other fashions. All the faces showed deep sorrow, and their crowns of magnificent plumage were bowed. This morning the people had no eyes for splendor. Now came the bearded strangers with their strangely fashioned mantles, and only they smiled as they passed, bowing. Behind them were more of the white-robed priesthood, wafting incense and chanting softly. Some among them were openly weeping. Far back on the highway now came the crying, and one can tell by the lamentations just where the prophet was passing. To the man near the vessel that sound grew steadily stronger, until, held high above the people so that all could see him without pushing, came the litter carrying the feathered serpent. Clothed in a white robe of spotless seed silk, with the wide golden scarf of the Mayan high priest wrapped about him above the waistline, his face was sad as he looked down on the people. In an unending series of blessings, the silent figure of the pale god passed. By the time his platform had reached the vessel, the strangers had climbed to their places, and the rowers had seated themselves at their benches. Now the prophet stepped from his platform and mounted to the ship's high deck, where the golden seat of honor awaited him. There he turned and faced the people. Now at last everyone could see him, and the crush of pushing was ended. Never before or since in all the broad land was ever heard such a terrible silence. Never since has it been known in the jungle. Hungrily the people sought his features, at once so peaceful and so lofty, sought the beauty of his white halo, shining in the morning sunlight like a mist of gold about him. Sadly they fastened their eyes upon him, knowing this was goodbye forever, trying to remember each tiny detail so they could tell their children's children to be passed onward through the ages. Others held aloft their babies, saying, "Look once more upon him. Glory is he of all the nations. Look upon him and remember." One man was heard to cry out, as if the words were torn from him, "Mightiest prophet of all ages, his face so noble is like a mighty echoing fire flame, which for us must be extinguished. Now he held up his hand for silence, the sacred hand, Cabal, and he turned and looked upon all the faces, on babes held aloft to see him, upon the old and on the youthful. Those eyes so gray-green, like the deep sea, rested fleetingly and passed on as the flowing of water, but each rest was a benediction, and each one felt that instant of blessing. Someone began chanting an olden chant which he had taught them, but since has become known as the chant of Cosmel. Almighty Father, who created all mankind and bound us here in this realm of service, open to us thy hand of mercy, that we may have shelter and food for our bodies. O you who dwell in the golden sunshine, in the liquid silver which falls from the rain clouds, in the depths of the sea and the power of the windstorm, our Father who art in heaven, most holy is thy word. Guide us, O Father, through life's trails of hardships. Deliver us from all that is evil, for thine is the power from the ice to the lava, and thine is the glory forever and ever. The prophet held up his hand again in final benediction, then turning in majestic silence, seated himself, his white robes falling about his sandals and whirling away in a torrent of black crosses. At this signal the ropes which held the vessel were loosened, and the ship began to turn out to sea. Then the prophet again stood and faced back toward the people, holding up his hand in benediction and farewell. The cries of the people broke forth like terrible thunder as the prophet once more seated himself and his ship rapidly moved toward the skyline. The crying must have echoed woefully after him as his ship shrank in proportions, for it continued long after the ship had gone. Yet as long as the vessel could be seen, every eye followed it and the dot of white on the golden seat of honor, until at last it vanished, along with the ship that held it, and wavered into the teardrops which blended that distant, stretching horizon. Did Jesus walk the Americas? Many Native Americans believe that he did. Our story today is entitled, The Prophet Makes a Second Visit. The Pawnee were a North American tribe that lived along the Mississippi River who remembered the prophet, the one who came and taught them of his Father, the mighty Holy of the heavens. He told them not to forsake his precepts, and when they returned again to warfare, the prophet made his second appearance, and here is where our story begins. Many tribes have tales of the healer, and how at one time he came among them. Few did he miss, no matter how distant or poor, or lost in the ways of other religions. But to the Pawnee he came twice, the last time in anger. The prophet had gone westward to that place we call Oklahoma, where the Pruants had a thriving city, and there he was busy erecting temples and instructing a priesthood. Some wild young braves among the Puani, who today are known as the Pawnee, formed a secret league to prey on the country, to make themselves rich by attacking the merchants and returning to the old war religion. The merchants thus captured they would give to the fire god, who would protect them, said the young men. Accordingly, one night the Pawnee waited in a glen of the Mississippi where the fleet came to camp and rest on its long journey from the southern sea to the capital city. Quietly flowing was the Father of Waters, when to the glen came the long ships of the merchants to discharge the weary rowers for good night's sleep in the forest shadows. They suspected no mischief, and no watch was placed over the campsite, since the Puans had long since been at peace. They laughed and joked as they built a campfire, and in noisy fun cooked their dinner. Then came the time of conversation, of remembering the long trip, small talk of girls in distant cities, of the customs of other nations, of the man in the flowing white mantle of whom there was great awe for the miracles he had accomplished. One youth was a skeptic. It is strange that we always seem to miss him, this young man sighed, for I would like to see him, this creature that we call the dawn god, and others the lord of wind and water. Then the talk became hushed, and the head man prepared the tobacco, starting to smoke himself by breathing it to the four directions, taking a few deep puffs of satisfaction before passing it onward to the man to his right in the circle. At last each got out his blankets, wove a bed of branches for comfort, and rolling tightly in the blankets was soon asleep beside the low fire. Then with the yells of Skiri the gray wolf, the wild Pawnee leaped upon them, snatching from sound sleep their surprised prisoners, now forced to carry their own trade goods back to the camp of the bandits. That was a mad night for the Pawnee, leaping and yelling in the firelight, as they staked out 2 men for the fire death for sacrifices to the fire god. Savage was the untamed dancing as they lit the flames about the puans. Only one old man protested. He pointed to the east where the star of the morning was rising, but the young men paid no attention. Who cared about the star of the morning? No one but the one they had called the healer when first he had come to see them, but now that one was far away, his magic weak here, as they chanted the wolf song. Laughingly they pointed at the prisoners where one was dead and another dying. Let him come and revive these men. That would be much better magic than stopping a windstorm or walking on water. Then a fire lit up the east sky, where cloud banks had been piled up, and everyone turned in wonder as consternation hushed the chanting. Suddenly he was there among them, shining with a strange radiance, each hair of his head luminescent, a weird glow rippling from his garments, and his sea eyes flashing with lightning. He stood staring at the Pawnee people. Is this the way you keep my commandments? Is this the manner of your insult to the spirit called Terawa? I come to shield you from his anger, or lo, a great wind would ignite the forest, and to ashes would be consigned the Pawnee nation. While the Pawnees stared at him as if frozen, a weak voice cried from the fire, Jesus, Master, from these flames, release me. The healer turned and looked at the tormented man. You are free, my son. Walk away from the fire. Then he staggered toward the healer, falling and clutching the hem of the white robe embroidered with its lines of crosses. Those who watched saw a miracle happen, one which they said could not happen, for the man straightened up without a blemish, nor was all over, for toward the dead man moved the prophet. Arise, another day is dawning. Thou art not yet for the land of shadows. Arise and return to the land of the living. The fire died away, and the blackened corpse stirred and lifted its head and its burned arms. Arise, my son, no chains are on thee. Come toward me and be made whole in body, for such this day is the will of my Father. The man arose and left the dark flames, staring at his good flesh, with eyes unbelieving, murmuring over and over, to think that I had questioned thy power. Forgive, my master, an unbeliever. Sealed with the lips of the Pawnee people, with both shame and the terror of a child lost and bewildered. Yet down through the ages have come this story, and sometimes the old ones repeated on winter evenings beside the campfire. The legend of the son of mighty Terawa, who came back in anger on the shaft of the dawn light, and by his presence saved from extinction the entire Pawnee nation. Did Jesus walk the Americas? The Native American tribe who called him Chizos believed that he did. Our story today is entitled The Old Chippewa Council. The Chippewa of the Great Lakes remember well the Pale Master. They say he gave them many medicine lodges whose signs and symbols are secret, fashioned from those across the ocean, and even today they hold secret knowledge. Let us now journey back into the past. This is where our story begins. Beside the shores of Michigami is the forest still called sacred in the state called Michigan. Before the wigwam stood Dark Thunder, kindly chief of the old Chippewa. He was gazing steadfastly westward toward the water-reflected sunset and blowing smoke to the 4 directions. Toward him came the college student, the one the tribe adopted by blood rights, and for whom there was warm affection. That affection was more than mutual. That child of the white race found all of these people charming. He admired the agile and cat-like grace of the dancers, the smooth silken skin of the women, the quiet beauty of their language, at times most hauntingly poetic in its phrasing. They lived in a world unknown to white men, a world in which the past was present, a past more distant than our histories. Upon their reservations, poverty-stricken and spirit-broken, the student was learning to see them through their own eyes as the ancient ones and keepers of the older knowledge. Theirs was a very rigid culture with patterns that ran back to antique cities, old before the rise of Egypt. There were proper ways to address one's elders, to enter a lodge, even to ask questions. My father, why are you blowing the smoke rings? Dark Thunder finished his meditation before he took his seat and began his answer. Because if you look across the water which rolls from the bay we call Keweenaw, you will see it is touched with sunfire. Yes, that comes from the clouds of scarlet which the sun paints as he leaves us to light the lands beyond the horizon. You learned well in the schools of the white man. You hint that there is another meaning? Yes, come and sit down here beside me. Know then that the fire path of the water is that traveled by the spirits who leaves this realm for those beyond the sunset. Long ago there came to us a prophet. He asked each tribe to name him, for to him names meant nothing. So we called him Wisako, and we covered his paths with flowers so that he always walked on petals. Now he does the same for the spirits who leave us, and I was giving Watesi my blessings. Yes, I heard of her death this morning, a lovely young girl, her cheeks bright with fever. The coughing sickness of the white man, once such diseases were unknown among us, but something in our blood seems to invite them. Perhaps in the blood of white man is a substance which resists them, having been built up through the ages. Yet the blood of red man, having never coped with these diseases, does not have this resistance. Perhaps, but tell me of this prophet who paints the water with long dead blossoms. The same. What was he like? Where did he come from? Your desire for knowledge is a thirst never ending. Forgive me if I am too inquisitive, but I have never glimpsed this knowledge, and my time here is short. A summer vacation is of short duration to grasp even a fragment of it. I know, my child, so I will tell you, though seldom do we speak of the past during summer, perhaps because in the days of my fathers, when we lived freely in the forest, the summer was a time for hunting and the gathering of fruits, nuts, and berries against the rigors of the winter. Very well, let us speak of the prophet. He was bearded and pale of feature, without doubt a white man. His eyes were as gray-green as still green water, and just as changeable in their color. He came to us one day at dawning, and the light touched his hair was a sheen of red gold until it shone like newly mined copper. Yet he was not as the men of your people. This one was a god, with high soul stature. If he touched a man who was wounded, that one became healed. His robe was long and white down to the hemline, which almost hid his golden sandals. Everyone wished to make him white robes, for then he would leave behind the old ones, and all that he touched was enchanted with his godlike power of healing. Did he bring other priests with him? No, he came alone. He organized the churches, changed the temples, taught the priesthood. Some say he taught them a secret language with certain signs of greeting. I know not. Why do you call him the prophet? Because he not only walked among us, he also walked the realms of the future. Are you sure that he was not one of the black robes who came to this land with Columbus? I am sure. He came to us when we had cities more than 1,000 winters before the days of the black robes and the long knives. When you had cities? Where are these cities? Below the cover of the forest. What a strange legend. You do not believe what I am saying? You think I speak to you with a forked tongue? Oh no, I do not believe that you would deceive me. I am enchanted with the antiquity. Where are these cities? The ruins have been scattered by white men. Then tell me the location of just one city. The city which we call the Sacred is not far from here. Its history is longer than that of England's London. But, my child, you ask too many questions. If I had listened to my elders with half the interest with which you listen, I might have had more to tell you, but I thought too much of swimming in the blue sea and running races through the forest. My father, for what you did here, I thank you. Yet I must ask of you a very great favor. Find for me another chieftain who will speak to me of these cities. Why would you have us do this thing in summer when it is not our custom? Because I want to write down these stories. Just to spread them among the white man so that he can laugh at us and speak lightly of things about which he knows nothing? No, someday I may make a book of such stories, not for the amusement of white man, but for the teachings of your grandchildren's children beyond our time, many generations, Already there are few who can tell these stories. Are there any others around here that know them? No, I would have to bring such a one from a great distance. You see, soon all these legends will be lost. I would know of these cities, I would speak to the future, perhaps beyond our lifespan, for a book is a bridge from the past to the future, upon which we stand for this brief moment. My child, you speak with the tongue of the red man, and knowledge beyond your number of winters shines from your words. Once we had books and priests to read them, but those were times long distant in the past. Books are of stuff which can be swept into oblivion. Since then we have placed our stories in the chance of our people, but now even these are being forgotten. Your oldest books to us are but of yesterday, and how long may last these papers of your people? Yet you are right. The chants are dying. I too would like to reach other tribes of our people and share with them our ancient history. Is there still alive a chanter of the legends? There is one. He lives at some distance. Go now and let me think on this problem. Come back in 8 days and we will talk further. I may then let you know the time of his coming and if he will be willing to chant in summer. There may be more than one, and then there will be translators, so that you may not miss the beauty of the language. Come back after the sun has gone down 8 times to the horizon, and speak of this thing to no other person. Then perhaps, during a night when a certain star is shining, we will journey back to the times of the prophet, when the land was peaceful, and we lived in cities. The student was new in the lore of the red man, yet one fact became instantly obvious. 13 was the prophet's number, although 8 was also important, and 5, the number of their difference. In due time came the night of the chanting. There were present many sages, proud old men of noble bearing, and apparently all of different languages. Their names have long since been forgotten, but never the drama of their movements and the melodic poetry of their phrases. Together these men made the past of North America in the days of the prophet come to life. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? The Chippewa Nation says that he did. Our story today is the second part of the Old Chippewa Council meeting entitled The Voice of the Dakota, and here is where our story begins. Together these men made the past of North America in the days of the prophet come to life. In the Chippewa lodge a tall man was arising. With a little grace he shifted his body, waiting for the murmurs to die into silence. In the full dress of the Dakota, he was a proud and exotic figure as the firelight played over his costume. Finally quietness came, and the rippling whispers ebbed away to a sea of silence. Never before that I can remember have the Chippewa invited a Dakota warrior to address them in council. No wonder, seeing this costume, there were many subdued whispers. Yet too long as enemies have lived our two tribes, and for that matter all the Indian peoples. Anciently we came from the same homeland. Do you not read that in these symbols used again and again in our costumes? It is so through all of our tribes westward. Indeed, it is time we dropped our dark frowns and learned to smile upon one another, seeking together our ancient history, for it is broken and shattered among us in legends which need more retelling in many languages for the light of truth and understanding. I was invited here to speak of Waikoma, the fair god who ruled the ocean and spoke in whispers to the windstorm. Our name is not the one you gave him, for when he came, we lived far to the southward, where the sun makes shorter shadows, and our cities were built on islands, many of which have since gone down into the ocean. As our land became scarcer due to storm and great earth-shaking, our tribe among us sought to be master. They began conquering city after city. We, the dispossessed, who would not live in slavery to those who had our same heritage, sought the mountains, many tribes in council. From our traders we knew of the Mississippi, and so in our long canoes carrying our sacred fire, we began our migrations. We of the turtle, keepers of the books and learning, led the many tribes of the serpent upon the great Father of waters. To commemorate that, we built the great mound of the serpent led by the tortoise. It is too bad that we had to take your cities. Many years had we lived in peace and traded, but sometimes we moved but to fill the belly. Such was our move into the woodland, among the herds which were to be had for the taking, and when one has hungry children, those herds meant life. Such was our move up the Mississippi. Near White Man's Town, St. Louis, where stood your great capital city, we built our capital. We did not destroy the crests of your building when you had written your history, but we added to them. White Man was a destroyer of both your histories and ours also. You realized our need, and you moved northward, and there was peace between us. Then there grew up in the capital city of the Black Tortoise, Dakota, who sired our tribe. He had a great dream for the red man. He dreamed of a mighty kingdom, solidly won from the sea of the sunrise to the sea of the sunset. He could not gain the emperor's attention, and he left for the northern cities where lived your people. Now, though you have been a peaceful nation, his pleadings did not go unattended. Ears were open to what he was saying. In the west there is much fighting. Fierce warriors come from the Northland, bringing great war dogs with them. We call them the men of the coyote. They burn and plunder and carry away the women. Now I would force them into cities. I would conquer them and make them peaceful. I would build one mighty nation, as in the old Red Land, which we both remember, which is ruled by two together, so I'd have you rule with me this mighty country. In your cities of the Northland you listened to the voice of Dakota. You gave him armies to train and your sons to learn the arts of warfare. Dakota was a mighty general. He conquered the Tortoise Empire and made his own mound after the Tortoise Mound of extinction. He might have succeeded in his dream, except that more of the hordes of the Northmen coming afresh down the west coast decimated his armies, and then civil war broke out over the Dakota Empire. Cities were abandoned, and each tribe took to the forest to raid and pillage and play at war games like naughty children. And remembering back, our wise men told us that once great Wacoma predicted that it would be so, even to the final coming of white man. Now, when it is too late, we remember. You asked me to tell you of great Wacoma. Our memory of him is greatly garbled, for so long ago was he living. We know that he prayed to the dawn star, and today, in his memory, our most sacred lodge carries that name. To the memory of him, I make his symbol, and for this night, I have spoken. The last man ended his story and sat down, with the final expression, tonight, I have spoken. Then our host arose, Dark Thunder. Slowly he looked about him in the tent where he sat around the great fire. Outside the wind sang through the leaves of the forest, and the sound made a sighing music. My heart is heavy to hear these stories. The feathers of my soul are drooping, yet almost as if foretelling the present is the manner of the prophet's going. He left our people one night when it was snowing. He was to go to the Cree northward to Canada, and after seeing the people northward, would turn toward the sunset and the western river running toward the sunset ocean. They say that as he walked onward, the snowflakes danced through the skies in patterns. There were two wolves which were always with him, and now they followed his footsteps. One was white and one was dark silver. He had laughed when they had offered to guide him, for he had often gone with the merchants and he knew the country well. Thus the people saw him leaving in an aura of dancing snowflakes, where he was before a living forest like ours tonight. He faded into the whiteness like a wisp of smoke is lost in a snowstorm, leaving only millions of moving snowflakes swirling about in fantastic patterns. Remembering this and how he predicted the distant coming of white man, like the snowflakes which blow in from the ocean, I am suddenly stricken with sorrow. Once we lived in the wild free forest on a planet just as the Great Spirit made it. Now that world is changed and sullied, and the red man walks away sadly through millions of engulfing snowflakes, lost like a wisp of smoke in the snowstorm. For this night I have spoken. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? The Chippewa, the Dakota, and the Cree tribes of Canada say that he did. Our story today is entitled The Western Seaboard. The prophet moved from South America up the Mississippi and by rivers throughout the United States. From Michigan, he proceeded to Canada. From Canada, he journeyed to the Pacific coast, and here is where our story begins. In Michigan, according to Dakota, is the ancient center of the giant cross of waters. To the south goes the Mississippi, to the north, the river to the Pole Star Ocean, to the east, the waters to the sunrise, and farther west, those to the sunset. Along this trail, toward the sunset, trod the Master's golden sandals. No tribe was too remote for his sacred visits, none too poor for his ministrations, none too warlike for his counsels. If he heard of a war, he went there, called the chieftains into conclave, divided up the territory, gave them seeds, and taught them gardening. Do not kill unless you are hungry, and then ask the animal's forgiveness and explain your great need for him before ever you pull the bowstring. This was a rule that never a red man would be so rash as to violate, so before the hunting each tribe holds a prayer dance of olden ritual. Always he called the feather serpent Imeshkotl, or Isikotl among the Algonquins. Always he wore the long white toga, embroidered with black crosses along the bottom, and walked through the dust with golden sandals. Whenever the people made him new garments, he left with them the old ones, which they treasured beyond all wampum, saying that to touch them was healing. During each of his visits he trained 12 disciples and one to be their leader, who would accede to his title after he had gone about my Father's business. After his visit, the grieving tribesmen carved a hand with the T-cross upon the walls of canyons so that none would forget him, and they would show to their children's children the eternal emblem of his coming. To the Chinooks the prophet came. Once, when leaning on his long staff, he pointed to the plain below them. Down through the cycles of the dawn star I see below us spread a city which shall be named Tacoma. It is a city of the white man. What are you saying, Master? Your name is Tucklaoma, meaning Lord Miracle Worker. The great white mountain where sleeps the fire god bears your name, Tucklaoma, not the plain below us. Yea, but the mountain bears another name, and few of the men who live in the city and use the name Tacoma will understand the olden meaning. The hot springs of Tacubaya mark the passage of the healer, while in the canyons of nearby Coso, where so lightly sleeps the fire god, there is a canyon of ancient recording, and in this long and silent gallery is the hand with the T-cross, and near it the great cross, olden symbol of the Master. To the land of the Havasu the healer came one early dawn, climbing down a steep trail into the great dividing canyon. With the sunrise sun behind him, they saw he of the white robe coming. The flame of the dawn touched his golden sandals, and long before they saw him raise one arm in greeting, meaning peace and prosperity to you, they whispered to one another, "He comes to us, the great Tacubaya, the mighty Master Miracle Worker." Then, with the whole tribe watching, they saw him stop and tap a large rock in the midst of the desert dryness with his long staff, and behold, there gushed forth water. He stooped and drank from the sacred water, which is still called the spring of Tacubaya. To the pueblos Tlaacoma came, who then were the outpost cities of the great empire of Tula, capital city of the Toltecs. Their lands were peaceful, their plantations extensive. In those days they did not need to hide on mesas to keep away from wicked raiders, for long was the lance of the Toltec armies to protect their outposts. To the Wallape tribe came great Tecopa, who gathered the chiefs in giant conclave and redistributed the grain fields. Then he taught them more clever gardening, gave them melons, pumpkins, and mescal, squashes, and beans. He showed them how to conserve water in hidden underground reservoirs. Many other plants he gave them, which have been lost throughout the ages. To the people of the White Rock he came. He told them that he had come here after the great war in the Southland, where all their cities were left burning, and they themselves but a splinter of a once mighty power. Sad in their hearts and ever homesick, they remembered their disaster. They say that he told them of another nation which had to flee oppression in days long banished. Then he showed them the beauty of their new land and how to make their gardens prosper. When he was ready to leave the pueblos, again he called the chiefs to council. When he told them he was going, they were desolate with sadness. Heavy our hearts and dark our future on that day when you will leave us, for there are tribes westward known to men as the sacrificers. Some day they will overwhelm us. Then unto these serpent people will I go, and I will teach them. Yea, but will nevermore we see you? In truth, I give to you a promise. Keep up my precepts, forsake all warfare, and you shall ever have my blessings, even beyond white man's coming, and woe to the hands that are raised against you. But will you come back to us, great master? Yea, if to my teachings you are faithful, and to show that you have lived each day rightly, leave a light at night burning against the time I will return through the dawn light, and lead thee unto my Father's kingdom. So every night a light is burning in Acoma and other pueblos among these tribes, which we call heathen. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? According to the Chinooks, the Dakota, the Algonquins, and the Wallapai, they all say he did. Our story today is entitled The Hopi Snake Priest, which takes place in Arizona, and here is where our story begins. The snake priest of the Hopi stood near the edge of the ancient Walpi and, with folded arms, surveyed the desert below. Thank you for the condor feather. You say you got it from the great zoo? For us, it is a bird of legend. It is that for all the tribes of the American Indian people, I told him. Behind him, the old fortress upon the mesa top made a background for his figure, beautifully clothed in his native costume. His skin, light for that of many red-skinned people, was as innocent of hair as the cheek of a young child. That fact, with this beardless people, proved that he had no blood of white man. For a moment we continued to stand in silence. To speak too soon or abruptly would prove only that one had little breeding in the quiet, ceremonious world of the red man. So I continued to stare at the ancient mud-brick city, already old when the Aztec monarch first heard of white man's coming. You wrote to me in your letter that you wished to speak to me of the pale God. Of those days now, few men remember. That I have learned, yet I would put those days in a book for reading so that young red men will remember the ancients, the heritage of all you people. He sighed and glanced back at the pueblo. Perhaps in your book you will write of my people, of their kindness, their old traditions, their peaceful ways, and their love of beauty. We belong here on the desert. It is a wild land, I murmured. It is our land, and without it, life would not be worth living. Ah, yes, the desert has a strange fascination. A never-never land of beauty? I said it was easy to believe in the fire god. See how he crushed and mauled the mountains, then twisted them up? Even the water holes, cool and turquoise, are not always filled with good water. You can tell by looking for the animal skeletons. And the heat waves paint strange pictures for the thirsty. Yes, I too know the desert. You should not have come to us in summer. It is not the time to speak of the ancients, but there are some hints that I can give you. It is well that you move among the nations. Ask the high priest in winter. Perhaps he will not turn his back upon you if he believes that you are honest and do not come to make fun of these stories. And when you yourself walk the broad land, remember that he was here before you. Learn to see his sign when it is carved in the canyons. Learn to know his name when you hear it spoken. Above all, remember that he loved this beauty, for it must have gripped his heart with talon feathers when, alone in the immensity, he watched the sunrise or the sunset. Remember this when the sun god is painting and you go forth to speak to the people of Tacopa, the healer. Speak of this when you talk to the people, and they will open their hearts to you when they see that your path of life is not crooked, but open and filled with beauty. They will speak and send you away with a blessing. May the Great Spirit walk with you down a life path of beauty, even as I say it now in our ancient language. Lolomi, forever Lolomi. Speak of this, and you speak of the prophet. Speak like this, and you will hear of the prophet. Did Jesus walk the Americas? Hopi legends say that he did. Our story takes place on Tiburon Island in the Gulf of Mexico. Our story is entitled The Untamed Serai, and here is where our story begins. Perhaps to no tribe is the memory of the master more a living thing than it is with the Sarai, the shaggy-haired, neglected Sarai living in poverty-stricken squalor upon Mexico's Tiburon Island. Still ruled by their sacrificing priesthood are the hardly untamed Sarai, still painting their cheeks with the ancient totem which came north on the Balsa migrations. Thousands of years ago, say the chanters, the Sarai were part of the serpent people living together with the turtles in their powerful ocean homeland long before the time of the deluge. After the great disaster, they fled to the land called the Snows of the Southland. Here they built giant cities and called themselves the Men of the Mountains. Underneath their powerful cities were the giant caverns of the serpent. After many ages, a northern army came down and burned those cities, and then the serpents fled through the caverns to where their ships were waiting and took themselves on the seas to other coastlines in series of long migrations. To them came Tlazoma, the miracle worker, in a canoe which moved by wind power. He stepped out on the beach in the early dawn. They marveled at his long white toga, his hair and beard gleaming with red lights, and his eyes the color of deep-sea water. They thought of him as a beautiful teacher who suddenly took on the halo of godhead. That happened on the hour of arrival. A man rushed out and fell before him, crying, "Ahantazoma, Lord Miracle Worker, for you strange rulers have come to us. Heal these eyes for so long darkened. Bring back my sight of the trees and flowers, of the sea and the people all about me." The master, stooping quickly, gathered up in his hands some wet sand, and placing it over the eyelids of the sightless man, said softly, "Go thee out and bathe in the ocean." With breathless awe the Sarai gathered. Here was the test. If he who had been blinded came back to them seeing, then indeed was a god among them. If not, then there would be a sacrifice for the snake god. The blinded man gave a scream of anguish, then a cry of unutterable joy, and came toward them running wildly. Looking at hands full of water, and at his curled fingers, at the sea and the sky, sobbing wildly, he fell at the feet of the healer. The Sarai, watching, fell down and worshipped, calling Ahantazoma, Lord Miracle Worker. For many moons the master lived with them, teaching them how to store their water in their giant clay-baked olas. He taught them how to feed their children after their mother had weaned them so that fewer would die as little toddlers. He pointed out to them many wild plants that could be prepared for cooking. Up to the time of the prophet's coming, and some say now, the tribe controlled its population so that it would not overrun the island or deplete the food supply by allowing no children life beyond that number which the death of elders provided. This ancient law was broken by the master as against the law which he gave them, raise not the knife in bloody slaughter. When the time came for the prophet's going, he called the Sarai to sit in council. "I am leaving you prosperous and happy, but other tribes need me, so I go to the Papago." "Nay, Lord, go not to the Papago. They are an enemy tribe of wicked people." But the master answered, smiling, "In my father's land are many lodges." "Then tell us, great Ahantazoma, you speak often of this land of thy father, yet you say not where it lies or in what direction." Softly the bearded one gave his answer, "My father's land lies deep within you." Did Jesus walk the Americas? The Sarai legends say that he did. In our next story, we will learn what happened when the healer went to the Papago. Our story today is entitled The Papago, and here is where our story begins. Early one morning, against the dawn light, the sandals of the healer came to the village of the Papago. The children had been loudly playing, and when the Lord of Wind and Water, whom the Papago called Quetzalcoatl, was seen approaching, the people were embarrassed and roundly rebuked the young ones. "Nay," replied the prophet to them in Papago, "do not scold the little children, but instead let them come to me, for such is the will of my Father in heaven." Every day after that, say the Papago, he met and talked with the children. The prophet did not live among them, but made his home on a distant mountain called Babo Kivuluk, which means the Hourglass Mountain, for at this time this was the shape of the mountain. One day Quetzalcoatl the healer wandered into a secret temple where a child was being sacrificed. The eyes of the master went red with anger. He snatched up the baby, healed its gashes, and calling it by name, gave it back its breathing. The priesthood stared and their arms were frozen. They could not move, much as they would have liked to kill him. Stepping outside where the people were gathered, he told them of the secret ceremony, which was against all of his teachings. The people were ashamed, but afraid of the priesthood. That night, 2 priests determined to murder the saintly man who was winning the people. They stole out in the moonlight for Babo Kivulak, slipping knives under their blankets. The moon was still up, yet the dawn light was coming as they neared the Hourglass Mountain. In a part of his cave facing the dawn star, the prophet was kneeling in prayer as the 2 blood priests stole up the mountain. The prophet arose and awaited their coming. As they slipped into the cave with knives uplifted, the Lord of Wind and Water stepped forth from the cave into the moonlight and faced them in their hiding place in the cave's dark midnight. Why do you not step forth from the cave and kill me? I have no knife nor rod to strike thee, yet you cannot, even though in the moonlight I stand revealed. Know you not that you cannot kill me until the tasks which were assigned by my Father to me upon this earth are finished? Suddenly the earth began to tremble, the roar became deafening, and rocks fell downward, dropping like rain about the prophet. Now the earth shook as if in a spasm, and with the roar of 100 oceans the mountain collapsed, leaving the healer standing still on the rock in the moonlight. From within the mountain he heard 2 voices pleading for him to go to the village and tell the people how the mountain had entombed them. As the dawn light came, Quetzalcoatl walked into the village. All the people stood staring in frightened awe at Babo Kivulak and then at the prophet. Where are the priests who came to see you when the fire god shook the mountain? They came with knives before the trembling. They are still within the mountain, and from a great distance you can hear their voices. My Father has spoken in the earthquake. No more am I to live with you. Walking away from them in the dawn light went white-robed Quetzalcoatl, nor ever after did they see him. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? The Papago legends say that he did. Our story today is entitled The God Wakea, and here is where our story begins. Once in the days long vanished, with 3 great ships which had sailed from the sunset lands, came white-robed Wakea, the fair god who healed the injured, raised the dead, and walked on water. He came to an outlying island of the Tahitian group where 2 tribes were fighting bitterly. Now, however, the Polynesians are all one people, anciently calling themselves Maori, from New Zealand to Easter Island off the South American coastline. They were the Vikings of the sunrise, rowing their longboats over the trackless ocean, guiding themselves by the stars of the heavens, and speaking one language from Hawaii southward. They used the same plants, kept the same animals, and sang the same songs of the ancients. One of these was of the god Wakea. To an island where men were fighting for the possession of the good land came 3 ships with giant sails, like enormous birds, with wings uplifted, glowing goldenly in the dawn light. Suddenly frozen to immobility were the warriors as the ships moved around a jutting headland. What manner of monsters are these with the great wings? Perhaps they have come to devour the people. Forgotten was the heat of the battle. Friend and foe stood facing seaward, weapons clutched in paralyzed fingers, staring in wide-eyed wonder. The ship's oarsmen, whose paddles looked like 100 centipede legs touching the water, rested now for their task of moving the giant monsters forward. Then the islanders saw something white moving toward them. Apparently it had come from the great birds, and it glided easily over the water with the rhythmical ease of a man walking. As the spot of white came closer, they saw in amazement that this was a fair god, man-like in form, but unlike their people. Soon they could see him clearly, the gold of the dawn light shining behind and around him, making a halo of his long curling hair and beard. They saw the foam-like swish of his garments. As he came up on the wet sand, the warriors stared in fright at his garments. They were dry. Now they knew that a god stood among them, for none but gods could walk on water. From his garments, so foam-white, they looked to his pale face, and then into his eyes. They were strange eyes, gray-green as the depths of the water, and like it, ever-changing. Now those eyes flashed with anger as he stared about him and looked upon the injured. A god had come from the sea to walk among them, and his first look was that of anger. The warriors fell down as one man and began an old chant, anciently employed to a god for forgiveness. When they dared again to raise up their own eyes, they saw him going among the injured and dying who arose from their pain to find themselves well of body as soon as his hand or garments had touched them. Thus on this never-to-be-forgotten day came the beloved Wakea to live for a while among the people. When the villagers arrived with presents, creeping on their knees toward him, he signaled the ships. Small boats now left the big birds and brought other strangers. These men, though something like him in features, and like him bearded, were different in two ways from the god Wakea. Most plain to see was that their garments were not white but colored. But there was something beside this material difference. It was the way these friends looked upon their leader. In their eyes one could see their reverence. In their strange speech one could feel their great love. Friend and foe among the Polynesians now set about to entertain the strangers, putting forth their choicest dishes, making welcome with song and dances. They invited the strangers to partake of the great feast. They had planned an entire night of merrymaking, but alas, as the sun began to paint the western sky with the colors of the orchids, hanging in profusion in the forest, they could see that the strangers were preparing to leave them. The sadness they had felt at this discovery was suddenly reversed when they saw the strangers were bidding tearful farewell to the god Wakea. Scarcely had the people dreamed of this good fortune, but now it was becoming very obvious that the god Wakea was planning no journey, but would remain among them. Respectfully at a short distance stood the people. While Wakea comforted the tearful strangers, they saw him point to the direction of the sunrise and wondered among themselves what he might be saying in his strange language. Then, after many further embraces, they watched the strangers enter the small boats and row back to the great bird ships. As Wakea stood there on the sand watching sadly, the chief stepped up quietly and pointed to a higher point which looked over the jutting headland around which the ships were now passing. Wakea nodded quickly, followed the chief and some of the people to the sun-painted high point. There they together watched the three ships move into the sunset, fading at last into the sea of beauty. Only then did they return to the village, and the great ships were never more seen by the tribesmen. Very quickly Wakea learned Polynesian. The people were amazed at the speed of his learning. As the long days passed, he began to teach the tribesmen. He told them of the one God who ruled the heavens, who spoke through the volcanoes, and who breathed on the ocean. To him war was not of his making, for his law was love one another. For Wakea, they gave up war and the sacrifice of children, which had kept down their populations, so they would not overeat their islands. Then the men carried him with them, taking Wakea from island to island so each one could meet the strange fair god, whose hands were miracles of healing. Many then were the songs of Wakea, and many the legends, which down the long vistas of time have been forgotten, yet his name has never been forgotten. Wakea had one strange custom. Every morning before dawn he would rise and pray toward the dawn star on some high point facing seaward. When they asked him why he did this, he said that even so would his friends be praying in that far-off land across the ocean. The people remembered, thought of that day when he had come to them, of his friends who had wept when they were leaving, and how he had pointed for them toward the sunrise heavens. Finally the fair god knew well of all the islands, and there was not one where he had not landed, feasted, and taught the people. It was then that he looked more often toward the direction of the dawning and asked questions about the lands of the dawn star. The people were not entirely unacquainted with the continent lying eastward. Did they not have the yam to eat and call it by its ancient South American name? Yet they were loath to lose the healer, this strange god who answered to the name they had given him, Wakea, the fair god of the ocean. As long as they could, they tried to dissuade his growing wish to travel eastward. Yet they loved him too much to deny his desire, and so preparations were made for the long journey to be made in the boats of the migrations. Through their tears the people watched him take his seat in the longboat, while one child called out in a voice broken by sobbing, "Are we never again to see you, Wakea?" In his melodious voice the fair god made answer, "One day you will see me returning, even as I came, through the light of the dawning, if you remember to keep my commandments and always love one another." The canoes of many rowers carried much food and water. Through wind and storm they stayed together, keeping each other in sight in the daytime, and at night by alternate chanting. Thus from the islands and into the sunrise rode the long boats carrying Wakia, beautiful creature of peace and laughter, whose curling brown hair trapped the red gold of sunlight, and whose strange level eyes held the sea's deepest mystery, changing like the water in light and shadow. So the fair guard moved into the dawn toward the lands of the dawn star, sped onward by the chants of farewell sung by the sorrowing people. And since that day, though some have said that he is sometimes seen in spirit, yet in the flesh they are still waiting for him to come back to his beloved islands of Polynesia. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? Polynesian legends say that he did. The stories I have shared with you of a saintly white teacher, whose hands perform miracles of healing, and whose strange eyes, gray-green as the ocean, look down the vistas of the future, are still whispered by the storytellers of 100 nations. His symbol is woven into blankets, carved upon the walls of canyons, burned into pottery, danced in dances. His name is given to rushing rivers, tall white mountains, sacred forests, springs of never-ending water, strong as his tale of the ancient Americas. The Pawnee remembered the prophet who came and taught them of his father, the mighty holy of the heavens. He told them not to forsake his precepts and gave them the traditional chant known today as the Golden Rule. Do not kill or injure your neighbor, for it is not he that you injure yourself. Do good to him, thus adding to his days of happiness, even as you then add to your own. Do not wrong or hate your neighbor, for it is not he that you wrong yourself. Rather love him, for the Great Spirit loves him, even as he loves you. The Algonquin of the eastern seaboard, when asked how they got their name for the dawn light, they say it was the name of the Pale One. They would not give him their own name, as he had asked them, for to him names meant nothing, and he allowed each tribe to name him. They asked him instead his name in childhood when he lived across the ocean. The name he gave them was a strange one, hard to say in their liquid language, so today they try hard to say it, Chizos, God of the dawn light. The Algonquin of the Great Lakes remember well the pale Great Master. The Chippewas say he gave them many medicine lodges whose signs and symbols are secret, fashioned from those across the ocean, and even today they hold this secret knowledge. The Dakota, they of the Turtle Totem, leading north the lines of serpents in their age-old migration, recall in long-lost adoration the sacred name of the pale-faced healer. It was long ago that we knew him. He gave to us our rite of baptism, many of our lodges, and our rites of purification. When he came to us, the days were warmer, the sun cast down shorter shadows. Well do we remember how he foretold the coming of white man and other predictions. We have backslid from his teachings, but to him we danced the Sundance. We remember Great Wakona well. In this series I have shared the travel route of the prophet as he moved from South America up the Mississippi and by rivers throughout the eastern states, and from Michigan, where he went to Canada, and from there to the Pacific coast, moving from there to the Pacific tribes by way of the Grand Canyon and Havasupai. He went to the Pueblos and then down to Chichihuahua Valley, to Tula, and later Chachula. And then the prophet sailed with the merchants to South America. Returning, he left for the Mayan Empire and finally departed from Cozumel Island by ship for an island lying toward the sunrise over the sea. So who was this saintly man who traveled the Americas? It is the opinion of the present writer that Quetzal must have been in the scene. Since the opening of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have come to know a great deal about this religious order of which Jesus was supposed to have been a member. We know now that he favored a white toga-like garment, wore no coverings on their heads, and also spoke of God as my Father. For those of you who have been watching and following this series and want to know more, I strongly recommend that you read the book, He Walked the Americas. There you'll find many more stories that I have not shared with you in this series. In closing, a special thank you goes out to the author, L. Taylor Hanson, for these thought-provoking stories. To Elaine Beam, one whose warm friendship and understanding had followed the author and the building of this book legend by legend through study, interview, and travel for over 30 years. And to Lord Kingsborough, who gave his fortune and finally his life to the legend as he died in a debtor's prison. Also to the brave medicine man of the Serai, who was blinded for telling the legend of the healer without the permission of the tribe. Did Jesus walk in the Americas? There is strong evidence to support the fact that he did. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. He walked the Americas.
We make him welcome. Speak, anyone.
Kiowa Pacer is true earth, round like ball. White man live all side.
Tell me, why men on bottom not fall off?
Never been there. Maybe they do.
Caused by Yahovah.
Ha 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 ha.